Welcome to tonight's regular school board meeting of the Bellevue School District. Today is January 20th, 2022, and we will start with roll call.
Jane Aris.
Christine Chu.
Seema Serafan.
Joyce Shuey.
Carolyn Watson.
Art Jarvis, Superintendent.
Okay, I've asked tonight for our Superintendent, Art Jarvis, to please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, as well as our land acknowledgement.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I also have the honor of reading the land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples who have reserved treaty rights in this land, specifically the Duwamish and the Snoqualmie tribes. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived and continue to live here since time immemorial. We reflect the historic context that brings us to reside on this land and accept responsibility to interrupt erasure. We commit to an ongoing partnership with the Snoqualmie tribe as we listen to, learn from, and lead with their guidance. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. At this time, I would move and ask for a second for approval of tonight's agenda. Do I have a second?
Could we move the minutes out of the consent agenda, please? And I also want to know, when are we going to discuss the graduation assignments that are in there? They're in the consent agenda for information. I just wanted to know when they'd be on the agenda.
So taking those out of order, you've asked to move 2.2 and 2.3 out of the consent agenda, correct?
Well, I don't know if we need to move the graduation. I just wanted to know when we would discuss it, if that's
Right.
Tonight or a different night or whatever.
Right, I was just saying 2.2 and 2.3 are the minutes total.
Oh, sorry.
But the plan was just for the actual dates to be approved tonight as part of the consent agenda, but assignments was probably going to be brought the next time. So with that in mind, is there any other item that you want to pull out of the consent agenda? I heard from you 2.2 and 2.3.
Yeah, I don't have extensive comments. I have a very brief comment, and I just wanted to vote on it separately from the rest.
Okay, so that is, but for the approval of the agenda, other than, I think, the consent agenda request, is there, which is actually not a change to the consent to the agenda, it's just a request for the consent agenda when we get there. But in terms of the actual agenda for tonight, do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, tonight's agenda has been approved. I have a very brief update. It's on our agenda, but it's relatively short. First, I'd like to acknowledge that tomorrow is the last day of our board coordinators time at Bellevue School District. It's Patricia Gasparich, and she's been kind enough to bear with our board for almost a year, and we've appreciated her support in one of the hardest and most challenging years we've had, and we just wish to acknowledge and thank her right now. So we thank you, and thank you, Director Chu. So we just wanted to do that at the beginning. We will also come and say thank you to you at the end, directly and virtually in a variety of ways. So we just want to thank you. A few things that I think are worth noting, one of which may be relevant to what Dr. Chu was also talking about. I think we, at our last meeting, Director Chu brought up the topic of minutes. We've had a chance to connect offline and with our general counsel about it. I think in general, the practice we've had historically has been the right one. We do have audio recordings of our minutes, and we also audio recordings of our sessions, but they are separate from our legal obligation to keep minutes. But, and having said that, what we are going to do is probably ensure that, I believe our superintendent has told us, just to ensure that we are all clear on what the requirements are and how that works. And we as a board will ensure that we are aware of what that is and how we will be fulfilling that ongoing obligation, probably through some training on the side. But having said that, I think the only other update we have is was the one I just gave. But I wanted to also acknowledge that before this meeting, we went through as a board all of our liaisonships, and we have our new liaisonships we voted on that we will share right now. So for Bellevue School Foundation, we voted to support Director Christine Chu as to continue to be our liaison to Bellevue Schools Foundation, with Director Joyce Shuey as the alternate. For Eastside Pathways, we have Director Chu as our representative. For Jubilee Reach, we voted Carolyn Watson. For PTSA Council, our representative is now Joyce Shuey, alternate Carolyn Watson. For Special Needs PTSA, our representative and our liaison to the PTSA for Special Needs is now Director Jane Aris, with Carolyn Watson as an alternate. For YouthLink, it is me, Seema Sarafan. We also have an engagement with the Eastside School Directors Group, which Director Christine Chu helped co-found a few years ago. And they help coordinate and collaborate with other local school districts on the East Side. Director Christine Chu will continue to represent us to that group as our legislative rep, and she will now be joined by our Vice President, Carolyn Watson. So those were all voted by our school directors in our special meeting, which occurred earlier this afternoon. So with that, we just go to our 1.6 on our agenda, which is acknowledgements. We want to recognize that this is National School Board Recognition Month. And notably, on Monday, we as a school district and as a country celebrated Martin Luther King Jr. Day. With that, it is a perfect transition to our student update. We have as 1.7 a student, Ava Carroll, who's a junior at Bellevue High School, and she's here with us today, and I think she'll be talking about her experience as well as what she's been celebrating. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Ava Carroll, and I'm a junior at Bellevue High. In my years at the Bellevue School District, I've been deeply involved in activism. Social justice and the school, or the learning environment, have a lot of intersectionality, and the school plays a much more significant role in activism than one might expect. Across the nation, we hear reports of America's oppressive history being censored and marginalized students' experiences of America's reality being pushed aside. In my experience, the Bellevue School District has made a strong effort to showcase America's diversity and commit to shaping kids to be more compassionate to their communities. I've done a lot of equity work within my school, including working with the district initiative Students Organized for Anti-Racism, or SOAR. We work to build new curriculum and resources to unlearn biases and deep dive into the nuances of solidarity and change. Some school districts may censor or restrict such an intimidating initiative, one that calls out biases and wrongdoings. But the Bellevue School District has not shied away. They've given us funds, resources, incredible teachers to collaborate with, and a chance for student voices to lead change. The district has paved the way for students to be able to make a resounding impact. Recently, Bellevue held a virtual assembly to honor Martin Luther King Jr. Many of the student leaders felt that while it was definitely a start to Dr. King's work in anti-racism and equity, that there was more to learn. So I reached out to our principals for a chance to put together a resource document to provide articles, books, and websites to learn more about how racism is entwined in our society and how we can work to change that. Our principals were enthusiastic and excited to work with us, excited at an opportunity to grow, and that sentiment gives me immense hope. MLK's legacy prioritizes compassion and equality, but we must not sanitize his message of radical freedom and revolutionary change. MLK was a leader in social justice and shaped a future in equality and equity. I hope that the BSD can continue to center his legacy as we act to also be leaders in our community as we work to eradicate racism and discrimination in our own schools and society more broadly. My being here today in a section devoted to student experience is proof that the administration values student voice in making changes. We work to remember the messages of leaders like MLK, Malcolm X, and Angela Davis. I look around at meeting participants. I see both students and teachers, parents and administrators. There is a community here, one that the district values and commits not just to representing, but collaborating with. We can only grow and become better if we all continue to actively listen with compassion, empathy, and solidarity.
Thank you. Thank you. We now go to item 2, which is our consent agenda. We have set aside, and we will come back to items 2.2 and 2.3, which were pulled out at the request of Director Chu. So with that, I ask the board to second the motion I make now to approve our consent agenda as modified. Is there a second?
Second?
Okay, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays, we approve the consent agenda. To Director Chu's question about item 2.4, I think what we have an opportunity to do between now and our next meeting is just for board directors to look at item 2.4 and consider what specific graduations you would like to ask for. And then what we can do is review that the next time. And so we won't have a board coordinator between this meeting and next one, but we'll find a way to ensure that there's the right point of contact, and that person can reach out if any of you forget. I think we also will know from our general counsel how you can generally share information. You can do it by directly emailing the president and copying in BCC, meaning dropping everyone else to BCC, so that you're sharing information one way, but you're not inviting a discussion. And then the discussion actually would happen in our next public meeting. And that's how we've sort of communicated in the past. It's worked effectively just by giving information, but not triggering conversation. So we now go to 2.2 and 2.3. So Director Chu, I think you probably wanted to have a discussion. I think
Just very brief.
Yeah, sure. For the point of following, I think the proper procedure, which I'm trying to snap to, I think the way we're supposed to now do it is we've pulled out those 2 minutes, items 2.2 and 2.3, and General Counsel can tell me if I'm going to mess this up, but I think at this point, I move to approve those 2 items. If I get a second, then we have a discussion on items 2.2 and 2.3. So she's nodding yes. So I am moving that we approve items 2.2 and 2.3 from our consent agenda. If I get a second, then we are able to discuss the topic that I believe Director Chu wishes to discuss. Do I have a second? We can't discuss it without a second.
Yeah, I'll second it.
Okay, so Director Chu.
All right, so I just want to note that I have noticed that there are a couple of things happening with our minutes that I think are not consistent with our expectations. And I think when the board directors go through the packet, sometimes there's hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff you're going through. And so I noticed that the last set of meeting minutes that we had approved had some real errors in them. And I mean, there was a vote for someone who wasn't even running for vice president, like in the vice president section. Roll call votes weren't noted as roll call votes, they were summarized with tallies. There was a suspension, a partial suspension of a policy that alluded to a portion of it that wasn't actually relevant. There were 2 things that were conflated in the summary notes. And I think that it's hard to keep track of all the subjective information that gets discussed. And so we have brought up several times over the years what's a better way to do it? You know, should we create a transcript? Should we do this? Should we do that? And I think I brought this up at the last meeting. But I think like the fact that the board directors all voted to approve those minutes is just testament to the fact that now we have official minutes that misrepresent what happened in our meeting. And so I'm going to come with a proposal for that particular one to see if we can make a fix to that. I think there's a process, and legal said that they'll get back to me with what to do about that. But I think to expect everyone to be able to do that kind of detailed dive into did these minutes say exactly the right thing and so forth isn't necessarily realistic. So I think there are some best practices that ought to be followed for that, and that we should, I think, well, there'll be some training, but I'd like to recommend that we go back to making sure that every single motion is captured as a verbatim motion, not as a summary of what we think it was about, but like as a motion and documented as such. And that for the notes, that decisions and votes are captured, but not summarized per se. So those are some things I would recommend, but in general, my understanding is that we're gonna make sure that when we have somebody take that position, that we'll make sure that there's appropriate training and that there's support for all that, because right now we've just had a lot of expectations and not as much time to get everything sorted out. And I think that showed up in how we voted for something that had errors in it. So yeah, I just wanted to call that out, and I wanted to say that while we're on our road to that, I think we either need to pull those out and be really careful about examining them and be very intentional about voting for them, or we shouldn't be voting to approve them. So that's just something I wanted to call out.
Sure. So I'm going to just address a couple of things. First, minutes historically are kept by the board secretary, who's our superintendent, and so that's been generally delegated to staff. I would say that we've not had actually training of the people who do that. And Superintendent Jarvis, following last time's meeting, called out that we've probably put our current and our prior board coordinators in a very challenging spot by not giving them that framework. And so that is on, I think, our district to be able to have an opportunity to fix that. Having said that, a few things kind of came from the exchange. First, the only, I think, specific thing that Director Chu was able to identify that I understand came back to staff was that from the December 2nd, the actual December 2nd, 2021 meeting, there's a typographical error where it merges me and Christine as one person and puts us under the VP.
No, it's more than that.
Let me, if I can, please, because staff looked into that and they asked you to pinpoint where in the audio recording there was a mistake, and I think, at least according to Executive Director Harrison, that was the one place that they agreed that there was a mistake. But what I'm unclear on is, I think, per your exchange with our general counsel, December 2nd, 2021's minutes are ones where she will give you instruction on how to revisit it because they were already voted on. I believe that our general counsel can tell us in terms of 2.2 and 2.3, if there's anything, I don't currently have anything that would suggest that 2.2 and 2.3 are not compliant. I know that what you said in our last board meeting, when you alluded to the possibility of not having minutes and just using our transcript instead, is not tenable. That's not, I think, permissible. So there
I just
are
want to clarify, you've said that a couple times. That's not what I suggested.
Okay.
That you could use a transcript in addition if you wanted to, but that the minutes needed to include the agenda items, decisions that were made, and board meeting materials, that those things should all be in the minutes. And that's all I was proposing, that we be objective about the minutes so that subjective summaries are avoided. And there is more than one error that I identified. And I have given them, it is all in 2 different sections, and I gave it to them, and I'll follow up on that. But I did not propose that we should just go with transcripts and nothing more. So.
Okay, right. I will not read what I mean. I actually went back and listened to it, but it's neither here nor there. I think we will be guided by our general counsel on what we can do or should do. but I think your point about ensuring that we have clarity around it, I think is well taken. My question right now is for 2.2, which is the minutes for January 6th, 2022 board meeting. Is that do you have a specific concern about those meetings notes? 2022, January 6th, which is our last board meeting.
I did not go through them in full detail. I've looked at them. There's some general things, but I'm going to abstain from voting on them.
Okay, what about the 2 point, because you pulled out the minutes that are December 16th, 2021, January 3rd, 2022 special meeting, and January 6th, 2022. So I'm asking, since you pulled them out of the consent agenda, is your ask that we?
My ask is that we vote on them separately from the rest of the consent agenda items
Okay.
until we have a plan for making sure that we have clarity about what the expectations are coming out of those summary minutes.
Okay, why don't we hear from our general counsel? Because I think the expectations are already articulated by her about what we will have. But if the question I have for you is there a point of fact difference on items under 2.2 or 2.3?
I am not bringing one to light at this time.
Okay.
I am asking for something else at this time.
All right, then I think what we need is just clarification for what you believe should be in our minutes. And whether, because I did ask you to review 2.2 and 2.3 for tonight, if you think there's anything in terms of format or process that is not correct in 2.2 and 2.3. And that's our general counsel, Shannon McMenemy. Thank you.
Good evening, Director, Superintendent Jarvis. I wanted to identify, if I'm hearing correctly, Director Chu, is your desire simply to have the opportunity to vote on the meeting minutes separate from the consent agenda so that you can abstain?
That's it.
I think that simply would resolve the issue with respect to reviewing these particular meeting minutes. With respect to meeting minutes generally, the superintendent has a list of statutory obligations, the first of which under state law is to prepare a record of each school board meeting. Record and recording are two different things. With respect to the purpose of the record of the school board meeting, it needs to be done in a manner in which it can be easily submitted to Superior Court for review should any citizen choose to take advantage of the Washington State statute that allows for appeals of school board decisions. Currently, King County Superior Court does not accept audio or digital recordings, and they look to the provision of meeting minutes to serve as part of the record of proceedings. Generally speaking, it also has, in my experience, been a way in which we can ensure equity of access to our community members who may have visual or auditory disabilities, to make sure that meeting minutes are accessible without having to go through the process of modifying either a transcript or recording of the entire meeting in order for a person with sensory disabilities to be able to access that information. And with respect to being able, what should be in the minutes, it's actually very straightforward. It should be an identification of those present, an identification of who is chairing the meeting. With respect to the superintendent being the secretary of the board, in addition to denoting which board members are present, it should denote whether the superintendent is here or if somebody has been designated to serve as the superintendent or the secretary to the board in his absence. If any board members are not present and their absence is being excused, that should be recorded in the meeting minutes. And then a focus of the minutes should be on actions taken and a record of what the votes were with respect to those action items. WASDA discourages school boards from having meeting minutes that attempt to summarize commentary in great length, simply because that can often become a point of disagreement with respect to a clear understanding of what was said by whom at meetings, and instead to focus on capturing the actions of the school board through meeting minutes that identify who, what, when, where, and also, for example, with respect to executive sessions, clearly articulates the reason an executive session happened, when it started, when it ended, and the adjournment time for the meetings.
Okay, have you had a chance to look at what's under item 2.2 and 2.3?
Can I ask a point of information question? Or two questions?
Please. Please go ahead.
Two quick questions, I hope. Because I'm new to the board, where there are like any kind of errors that we see either in the substantive content or, for example, a misspelling of a name, what is the best mechanism? Is it when we get a copy of it to email the board coordinator? That's my first question. And then my second question is, to the extent that there is a request of the administrative staff of the district to do something, does that get reflected in the minutes or not?
So with respect to the first question, anytime the meeting minutes are in draft form and provided to the board for your review in draft form, they can be corrected, amended, adjusted at any point up to and including before the meeting minutes come before the board for vote. So up to and including the time in which the consent agenda is introduced, given that meeting minutes are typically part of the consent agenda.
By contacting the coordinator? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Harrison is nodding yes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then if we could have you restate the second question, please, I want to make sure I get it correctly.
Yeah, if there is a request or an action item requested of the district, for example, last time there was a request that they look into public comment by through a virtual remote mechanism, and does that type of request get captured in the minutes or no?
I would encourage moving forward for when there are circumstances where that type of request is made and it's not already an agenda item or something that is identified for discussion, that there be a motion made to make that request to the explorative staff, and then it is captured by motion. And so that way it's clear that it's an action of the entire board as opposed to a request from one board member, which obviously has a different implication with respect to memorializing the action of the board.
Very helpful. Thank you. And Director Watson, I see her hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so I did review the January 6th minutes, and I found, you know, I was able to spot one small kind of more like a typo grammatical error, which I then emailed the board coordinator and got fixed. I will say that as you're reviewing the minutes, it's pretty easy to spot things that need to be corrected in what's there. What's harder for, I think, anybody is to try to remember if there's something that's not there that should be there.
Hence my question about the request. So that's really, okay.
And so I'm almost wondering whether I need the transcript to sit with the minutes to see like what was forgotten. And so then that becomes a big project. But I have one other suggestion is, I wonder if we should move to written motion forms that I learned about from the Washington State PTA parliamentarian, where the person who makes the motion writes out the language of the motion and passes it to the secretary so that it is, you know, recorded with the exact intent. Just a suggestion.
So I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to have this. I know it seems like a small item, but I actually think that this is part of the governance model, and it's important for us, the suggestions that Joyce and Carolyn have spawned through the discussion with our attorney now, I think are thoughtful and important.
Yeah, agreed. And I think at this time, I'm just going to ask, so I think there's two things. One, we had Council McMenemy, we talked as a board of inviting you for probably a opportunity to talk about a variety of legal issues, probably in part as a future development session. And I think that is an opportunity we will explore. For this particular time, I think I would just ask, have you had a chance to look at 2.2 and 2.3 as a format, not as a record against which you could look at, you know, based on what you heard in the meeting? But is there anything about the format that would tell you it's not a good idea for us to go forward in terms of my motion? Okay, so I would at this time.
Can we ask her specifically to comment on the superintendent update being summarized? Because we didn't get that in written form, so there is a summary text, and she had said that WASDA says don't do summary text, but this does have extensive summary text, so can you help understand?
Sure, let me give you an example of where that particular type of commentary is discouraged by WASDA. Trying to summarize public commentary, having lengthy, this person said this person said that, this person said this, where it becomes unclear what the action was. And so I think that I can work with Director Harrison to make sure that moving forward, we have a consistent format and make sure that the board coordinator is well trained to understand what should be captured in minutes, and making sure that the meeting minutes align with the agenda from the last meeting and reflect the key core elements that need to be there. I don't necessarily think that a lengthy description of a superintendent update or superintendent report is needed. For example, it could be the superintendent reported on the district's hiring process. And that would be a sufficient way to capture what the superintendent's update was without going into lengthy description of what exactly it was. There may be specific circumstances where, based on an issue that comes up during the meeting where the superintendent works with staff because they feel it's necessary to have the record of the meeting be accurate to reflect a specific conversation. But that would definitely be a more case specific or meeting specific discussion.
Okay, thank you. I've already asked Director Chu if she had any issues with 2.2 or 2.3, and she said she didn't, but she will be abstaining, which I understand. I, at this time, will make a motion to pass 2.2 and 2.3 as items that were pulled from the consent agenda, but this time I move to pass. Is there a second?
Director Serafin, may I move to with a slight edit just to correct Director Aris's spelling of her name, as names are important?
Yes. Can you just identify which of the two motions that comes up for? The 2 minutes.
For both, are we are we voting on December 16th first and then, or both of them together? Because
together, but we can split them out if they're if there's a distinct motion for each.
No, it's the motion is the same, is to correct her spelling of her name in both of those minutes, the December 16th, January 6th.
With that modification, I understand you have seconded the motion. Is
Yes.
that right?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
All
Yes.
those in favor?
Aye.
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 And I have an abstention from Director Chu, or am I wrong? Sorry.
I'm going to step back and recommend that you do this in 2 steps, and first have a director move to amend the meeting minutes from that are being approved to change the spelling of the director's name to be accurate. Have that motion seconded, vote on that motion, and then go back to the main motion of approving the 2 sets of minutes.
Okay, I so move to amend the draft minutes to correct the spelling of Director Aris's name.
I second. Oh, I should actually let Director Aris second.
I
Please
second that.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, the motion passes. At this time, I move that we pass items 2.2 and 2.3 that were pulled from the consent agenda. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I think I have 3 ayes. But do I have 4? Okay, 5. Okay, 4. And do I have an abstention or okay, and 1 abstention, Director Chu. With that, the motion passes. 2.2 and 2.3 are passed. And I do invite and welcome both the future session with us as a board and your opportunity to work with Executive Director Harrison. So thank you. And just to be clear, this is, I think, something we've been probably dealing with as a board for a few years. It's overdue, and we've just never had really the intentional focus on it. So I didn't even know there was such a thing as minutes training. So I'm grateful that our superintendent told us about that, and we will avail ourselves of that great opportunity. So thank you. With that, let's move to, we'll try to make up time like a pilot. Section 3 on our agenda, our superintendent update.
Thank you, President Serafin. I have basically two items for the superintendent update. The first was the response. There was a request to update our Title IX sexual harassment in a sense of what actions, what have we done. We've heard a number of our students approach us over the last couple of meetings with some requests. And really the question, I think, as I interpreted it from the board, was could there be a summary of where we are and what we're doing as a school district? I think it fits very timely with a couple parts. Number one is a while back you heard me refer to how do we put a face on the district that deals with something other than just the district defending itself or the district process, and particularly if that process is protected to the point that it's not transparent to what's going on and where we are. You've been hearing from our new general counsel, Shannon McMenemy, and I'm specifically bringing her into this conversation because she and I have partnered in another place where we had the opportunity to create a director of student life position. And the role of that position was to represent to the students in particular, but certainly the parents, the side of the district that says we care, that we can figure out how to navigate the district other than just the officialdom of a very large school district that is sometimes not very opaque, or perhaps it's very opaque, but it's not very, I guess, very possible for people to look at it and say, where do I contact? How do I determine that there's any support or awareness of who I am and what I'm suffering in the school district? So I mentioned Shannon McMenemy because that was a part of the world that she and I shared and created something new, and I think it's been presented out and around probably throughout the nation in terms of a model to try to answer that question of how do you, in addition to doing Title IX or sexual harassment or all of the elements, the harassment, intimidation, and bullying, how do you also represent the school district as a place that understands and support and help people navigate? So I refer to that because, as I mentioned it before, and now with Shannon on board, that's something that we will be pursuing to try to figure out how do we do that in the Bellevue School District? How do we create something that is not just the implementation of Title IX rules or harassment and the investigations and the culmination of that, but also recognize that this is a system of children, whether they're 16 years old or whether they're 12 years old and their parents, and trying to figure out where are we as human beings and how do we keep them afloat. So I mentioned that first and foremost, that's basically on the table and trying to figure out how to implement that. If I may, I'm going to tease Shannon McMenemy a little. Part of her work in the last few years has been aggressively addressing school districts on the other side, representing people who were perceived by themselves or needed to pursue a process. And I think you couldn't get a more perfect partner in this to advocate, to understand, who knows the full system and knows the rules, and at the same time says there is a way to be human about it. The second part of what I want to address is really, I'm going to turn to our Deputy Superintendent, Eva Collins, because both in the schools and throughout the administrative ranks, people have in fact been paying attention and finding ways to interact with students, to look at training issues, to ascertain conversations with students in classrooms, and how do we proceed in having a set of students in particular, as well as the community and the family, understand the system, understand how we can help, understand the strictures which are in place. So I asked Eva Collins if she would prepare, and I think in the typical Eva Collins fashion, she put together a whole grid of things, but activities have been underway. We'll try to keep it short, Madam President, but at the same time represent the kind of things that have been underway, and there are others in the room that have been actively engaged in that. So we will certainly bring them in. But Eva Collins, would you share?
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. I first want to start by saying that we greatly appreciate the many students who have expressed their concern regarding sexual abuse and sexual harassment in the schoolhouse and have communicated their interest in being involved in improving systems in the district and in our schools to better support students both proactively and responsibly. And I heard Ava mention earlier about student activism as an avenue for students to demonstrate their agency as leaders of change. And that's exactly what we want for our students. So I appreciate and applaud them for their activism and for using their voice for change. But I also wanted to say how appreciative I am that they came forward not just with the problems, but with solutions and are willing to roll up their sleeves and be a part of that solution. So I'd like to share with you a summary of actions that we have or will be taking. And we view this list as a point in time for the work that has been done, but will also be ongoing. So it isn't like this is an exhaustive list of everything that we will do and then we'll just check it off and be done. This is ongoing work. These concerns that have been raised, we categorized into 4 general areas. These aren't exhaustive again, but these are the 4 areas where we have been focusing our attention. And one was training, student support, policies and procedures, and curriculum. And so in the area of training, we have been looking at what training do we provide for staff, for students, and for families. Our students said, look, you have a lot of training for kids, but maybe you need to look at your staff training. We do have a lot of training for staff that's actually required annually, but we also recognize that these issues wouldn't be raised if that was working in all areas. And so we are examining our training and how we could improve. So for example, this year we added trauma-informed response training to the mandatory training, but new training for our administrators will also be added this spring on just what Dr. Jarvis was describing. We've done a lot of training on the technical aspects of what do these policies mean, how do you conduct an investigation, but not necessarily on the human side of how do we work with our students and ensure that they are supported throughout the process. And so I think we have some suggestions from our students that are going to help us through that. As I'm going through this, I also want you to know that our Executive Director, Dr. Patty Sigworth, and Director Jeff Lowell have been meeting with students, particularly the individual students who have come to speak to the board, and to hear the concerns individually and collectively, but also to hear ideas and to work together and more collaboratively. And I think that's what our students have been asking us for. Other things that were raised and areas that we're taking action. So students do receive training on sexual assault and are currently just in grades 7 and 10 in the health courses. But right now we have initiated a health curriculum review based on the state's requirement. There's some legislation that came out in 2020, December of 2020, and is required to be implemented by the school year 2022-23. And so we do have a developer, PE and health developer, who is working with a group of folks, of educators, to look at where are we teaching certain topics in health and where do we need to improve. And this will be one of the topics, but looking at how do we do that across the board instead of just in 7th and 10th grade, which is part of the intent of that legislation. We're going to include students in that, by the way. So the students have come and said, we want to be involved in that. We think our input is important. So that will be included. We have an Aspen course at Newport High School that is a health course that's about making healthy choices. And so we are looking at how can we expand either that course or some of the content of that course across all of our high schools, because it's turned out to be tremendously impactful and helpful. And so we want to see how can we get more broad participation in that kind of coursework or those kinds of topics. For families, we had a forum for families at Newport High School, and the event was recorded. The recording is to be provided to the organizers to share with other PTSAs. Additionally, the recording will be posted to the district's YouTube channel and can be shared with schools and students as appropriate. And we're also looking for additional ways that we can provide information to families, because a forum isn't always the best avenue. They're not always the most well attended, but using technology can be helpful. Student support, you heard Dr. Jarvis talk about adding a position as the Director of Student Life to support students. Additionally, students had asked that we have a counselor at each high school designated for the purpose of sexual assault, which we cannot add an additional counselor, but what we can do is to designate a counselor who would then be highly trained and become the expert at the school, essentially serving in that role. So we are working on a plan in order to do that. And then I already mentioned about our central office staff meeting one-on-one with students, and those have been extremely informative and helpful. We facilitated a school-wide town hall at one of our high schools to share concerns and problem solve. So these are ways that we're getting more input and information. One of the big questions that came forward was, why does the HIB form include a question asking the victim, why do you think this happened? And we agree that that's inappropriate, which is why that was changed on our form earlier, but apparently the old form was still linked in some places. And so what we need to do is make sure that all of our schools are informed that they need to use the updated form. We also found, as a part of doing the investigation, that OSPI has that on their form, and so we contacted them to have that question also removed. And so I don't know that they realized that that was happening. There was also a request to have a separate form for sexual assault versus just the HIB form. And so we are now working on the development of that. And curriculum. There was a question about health curriculum and some of the terminology used in our sex ed topics. And so that is also a part of this review by our health developer, curriculum health developer. Again, I want to thank our students for their active involvement and advocating for change where they see that's needed. I think that's extremely important.
So thank you. I wanted to thank you for the update. I know we're running a little behind and we have public comment coming. I understand there may be board questions, but we have a discussion later. Unless it's going to be quick, I'm going to ask that we move to public comment with only one request that I have, which is General Counsel McMenemy, you were kind of referenced in terms of Title IX, and I just wonder if, for the benefit of those who are listening, if you could just give a little context about what Title IX is and how it provides the framework that's relevant for HIB.
Absolutely. So Title IX is the federal law that provides that schools should be free from discrimination based upon sex or gender. And within the subset of protections identified under Title IX, which obviously most people have thought of historically in the context of sports equity, is specific language associated with what school districts should be affirmatively doing to prevent sexual violence, sexual assault, sexual harassment in schools, as well as a process to undertake once allegations of this nature are made. And so it is a separate process from state HIB, harassment, intimidation, and bullying laws, which are really focused on when harassment is occurring not necessarily because of membership in a protected class, so not necessarily because of gender or sexual gender or sex, but they do work fairly hand in hand. And I am going to credit Dr. Jarvis for creating the student life model, because I promptly replicated it in other districts because it seemed very wise to put a person or a group of people together who were both the harassment, intimidation, and bullying compliance coordinator and the district Title IX officer together, so that when situations happen, they look at it from both lenses, as well as from just the lens of how do we best address the situation, take care of the students involved, and serve as the hub of information as we provide information to different portions of the organization that need to address particular areas. It also does lend well to consistent and systematic training, and having the individuals who are serving in those roles go beyond compliance training. So obviously they would get compliance training, but for example, training and understanding the neurobiology of trauma and how that impacts memory, and understanding that information so they can then train building-based staff on how to conduct investigations, recognizing that trauma may play a role in how people remember events.
Okay, thank you. Director Aris, I think you had a comment or question.
I do. First, I want to say thank you very much to the students who have come and spoke with and shared at our board meetings. I know it's hard, especially if you're the victim. I try not to cry when I hear your stories. That said, I appreciate all the actions the district's taken. Have we formally informed our students of all the things that we are working on? Because I think those students who are showing up, I know that they're hearing, but for many who don't have the courage to come here or have the time to hear, they need the access to this information as well.
And
I really appreciate that to Director Aris, because that was actually one of the recommendations from our students, is how to publicize some of the things that we're doing. And we have not yet taken that step. This was step one, was to share with you. But that is something that we need to figure out what's the best way to get this information to students. Students don't access generally through email. Like, we have to think of better ways, and I think our students would be able to tell us what the best way would be to share.
Okay, I see a hand raised, Carolyn Watson, but
yeah,
I just need to say, we have public commenters waiting, so.
I know, but I just have a request, which is, I think this was great. I couldn't write fast enough. Is it possible we could have Eva's comments in outline format? Because I have a meeting coming up.
Yeah,
with
you have a
certain
thumbs up
parent.
from the superintendent. He's giving you a thumbs up. They will write
Okay,
it up.
great. Super.
I got to tell you, Director Watson, I have a lot of trouble hearing you tonight, so I wonder if maybe you could turn up your microphone possibly.
Right.
It might just be me, but I'm having trouble hearing you.
All right.
Director Shuey, please.
And I don't know if this is the appropriate time for a motion, but because we're talking about public comment, and I mentioned that at the last meeting, we did talk about doing some research on seeing how we could have public comment. We see how important it was and how it does help our district improve. And so for the folks who are not able to be in person, we were going to get some feedback from the district on how that would be possible. So I don't know if I should put that into the form of a formal motion to request that the district do research into how to accept some public comment remotely.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest that we raise that in our discussion, because I think we do need a motion, and then we can flesh out exactly what's in that motion. I do recall you raising it, and I know the district was going to look into it. We also had conversations offline about you connecting with Executive Director Harrison. So I think it might be helpful if we pull that into our discussion section, and then we follow up with a motion thereafter. So with that, I see Director Chu's hand up, and after that, I would encourage us to go to public comment.
So short question about, and follow up to what the superintendent and our and Director Collins have brought up to us. What I wanted to know is, one of the things that has come up over and over and over again is the follow-up with students who are reporting being a survivor or victim of sexual harassment or other forms of harassment and problems. Is that one of the things that's being actively worked on in this new, by this new position, or is that just something that may or may not come up? Because I think it's come up over and over again. And I think we often answer it with the thing of, well, we can't tell you this or whatever, but like, there's much more to it than the legal logistics. And so I'm wondering, is that being actively figured out?
I just want to make sure I completely understand what you're asking is the follow-up with the student during a process. So an investigation is ensuing, and how do we follow up with the student to make sure that they're informed of what's happening or what has happened as a result?
To be clear, there are multiple students involved usually in these allegations. There's somebody who may have been alleged to have done something wrong. That person should be followed through all the way. Mm-hmm. And then there's a reporter, and then that may or may not be the victim themselves. And so all of those people have a vested interest in understanding how things are being taken care of, what levels of accountability are in place, and how their concerns are dealt with. Right. Additionally, sometimes there may be a finding that on a technicality there wasn't an issue, but that doesn't suddenly mean that the person who feels victimized feels safe all of a sudden. So trying to understand exactly what the follow-up is, in terms of keeping the person informed and making sure that they are their needs are fully addressed.
Right. There's two parts to that answer, I think. One is what's already written into the policy and procedure in terms of timelines and following up with all parties, right? And what needs to be shared. So that's part one. And part two is, and then making sure that needs were taken care of regardless of what the outcome was.
Wait, just to be clear, are you saying that the procedure was changed, or are you just saying, no? Yes, I'm asking about the execution on what's in the procedure because it doesn't appear that it's consistently followed, and the other part, yes.
Right. So we have timelines already currently in the procedure, and yes, that's part of the review around, do we need a new form? Do we need to update our policy and procedure currently that we have in light of the issues that have been raised? So that's kind of the procedural. The second part is, so the answer is yes, that is part of this. The second part around your question about, well, maybe we find, oh, there was no fault or whatever. And so then a tendency could be, and this is common, I think, in HIB, well, there was no HIB was found. Well, that doesn't resolve the issue or the harm necessarily, right, that was done. And so sometimes when we have formalized some of these, you know, in the old days, we would work to problem solve and we would address the issue at its heart. Now we have these procedures and whatever, and they may or may not result in any finding. But even if there's no finding, the student is left feeling, they have some feeling about that, like something did happen and there is some feeling about that. So leaving them feeling in some way. And that is part of our upcoming training that I talked about for this spring of how do we then serve the human and the issue at heart, like set aside what we took care of the procedure and what was required. How are the humans feeling, the people?
Okay, so I think with that, we are probably well over time unless Superintendent Jarvis has any concluding thoughts. I know there's an action being asked by you, by Director Watson. If you would like, we can have a formal motion, but I think the ask is probably one that we all would have our ability to have a summary of. Okay, so should we expect it? Oh, that's great. I mean, I think by end of, yeah, okay, that would be great. Thank you. So with that, I think we should go to public comment now. If we can project the names as well as the sort of expectations around public comment, that would be great. So let me just start by just saying we are grateful to have people come and provide public comment. You heard Director Shui talk about last meeting and again raised tonight our desire to ensure that we are broadening, not narrowing, our multiple ways of being able to give public comment, including trying to devise a way where we can ensure that we balance the logistical challenges of doing things online through public comment and ensuring we not in any way have a viewpoint selection challenge. But we also recognize that coming in person is not possible for everyone, either physically or often economically or logistically. So we are, as a district, exploring that, and I think we will have more to discuss later. But with that, we just wanted to welcome those of you who are here in person. Thank you for showing up. You can read, and I would ask you to read while you're waiting, our rules. I won't read them out loud to you. Just be aware, because this is publicly and available in real time. We ask you to keep in mind that what you say and how you say it is both an issue of civility for us. It's also a legal issue. So for that reason, we will make every effort not to interrupt you and tell you, your language or how you're speaking about somebody is a problem. We will do our best to hear you. We generally do not comment back, but we are listening, and we invite you to then step up. When your name is projected, you each will have 2 minutes, and we would ask you to please stay within those 2 minutes. Otherwise, you shortchange someone else. So if we can see who the first name is, thank you. It's Joel Ingraham. Thank you.
Early literacy is vital to a student's academic success. It spans special education, MLL, equity, state testing, graduation rates, and is the foundation to all other academic learning, including math and science. This year, we have seen progress that has been driven by the new K-2 early literacy and dyslexia law, and structured literacy interventions in the classroom are now required. Questions: how many BSD teachers have been trained in structured literacy? We need one in every elementary classroom. Why is this work to address literacy being driven by a law and not by existing district data indicating we have an issue? How will the new dyslexia screening law impact demand for special education if we are not addressing literacy and dyslexia in the classroom? What are the district's plans for grades 3 through 5 and beyond? When will the science of reading be fully embraced by the district? When will the superintendent's report include updates on literacy, the new literacy law, and the science of reading? When will we fully support educators in this work? Systems change requires more than just a new law and requires more than a new mandate placed on our teachers. It requires a commitment to that change at every level. The first step is professional development for every leader, every principal, every ITCL, every teacher, and every para. We should not settle nor solely rely on a new law to drastically improve literacy outcomes when we can do so much more. It is time to get excited about structured literacy and the science of reading rather than struggling to be compliant. We know what works. The law requires it, and we just need to go all in. I'm not willing to wait 10 years. We need to address this issue now. We can do it as a community if we take off the glasses, make a true assessment of the situation, and then take bold, big action. We need change that is lasting, change that is uplifting, change that values our educators, change that improves academic outcomes, change that aligns with instructional best practices, and change that gets results. We need systems change now. Thank you.
Thank you. Christy Schweisinger.
Hi, I'm Christy Schlesinger. I have 2 students in the district. The dyslexia law and literacy was passed 3 years ago, and we're still pushing for training for our teachers across BSD. 1 in 5 students has dyslexia. Because the district has failed to address dyslexia until this year, it has become a massive special education problem when it should not be. The current law addresses K-2 students with required assessments, but any student in 3rd grade or above has already fallen through the cracks. It takes twice as long to support these kids after 3rd grade. In districts where literacy is taught by the science of reading, nearly 90% of students with dyslexia will be addressed in Tier 1, the classroom, and at most 10% will need special education services. The dyslexia law requires teacher training and structured literacy, but most of the elementary classrooms across the district are currently not in compliance. We must rethink our support and training for every classroom teacher. They will need additional time off to accommodate these structured literacy professional developments and grants to pay for them. Experts across the country recommend specific training called LETTERS, which is grounded in decades of research on how students learn to read and the way the brain decodes language. Additionally, core curriculum in early grades should focus on explicit phonics instruction. States like Mississippi and California have approached this more than 5 to 10 years ago and focus on the science of reading. They have seen an increase of 15 to 30% across all literacy in all grades. Edmonds and Everett School District in our state have already began LETTERS training for their educators, and BSD needs to do the same. Our teachers want the training, they just need the resources to do it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Ava Schlesinger, did I say that right this time?
Yeah, thank you.
I definitely butchered your name, but I may have gotten hers right.
My name is Ava and I'm in 4th grade. 1 in 5 kids has dyslexia. Some of the smartest and most creative people have dyslexia, including Albert Einstein. It is very hard in the classroom when I can't get help. All of our classroom teachers need to be trained so they can help kids like me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ava. Okay, I think next we have Steve Mutkoski.
Good evening. Tough
Hello.
act to follow there. Good evening. My name is Steve Mutkoski, and my wife, Jen, and I have 3 children in the district. My comments relate to our youngest child, Reese, who is in 3rd grade, and my comments are at the intersection of literacy, special education, recovery services, and compensatory education. We were unable to attend or listen to the special board meeting this week, but we did see some notes posted on social media about topics discussed and questions asked. In particular, we heard that Director Chu asked a question that was prefaced with a statement to the effect of, for 10 years, we've heard about issues of special ed and that things are not operating optimally in the special ed space. And that was made in reference to a new report on special education in the district. Our family has a few things we would like to share. It's hard to know where to start, and it's hard to not get frustrated trying to organize these thoughts. We may be just another anecdote, but I tend to think we're part of a decent number of families who have been failed by the district, including the special education process, and have had to spend large sums of money and lots of time to make up for those failures. We have receipts, as they say. Reese Mutkoski has dyslexia, and despite us raising alarms to his teachers and his school administrators, he was not given an evaluation for nearly a year. Even after his evaluation and him qualifying for an IEP and special education services, we struggled to find anyone in Reese's school and then anyone in the district who could provide the appropriate instructional interventions. Eventually, after 19 months and finding ourselves with a pre-literate 8-year-old at the end of 2nd grade, we broke out our checkbook. We paid for a costly neuropsych exam and for private speech tutoring. But because Reese has never been able to read, he had fallen far, far behind.
I just need to tell you, you're over your time, so if you could just take 10 seconds, if you could,
Sure.
And just wrap up.
Not just in English, but in subjects like math as well. Seeing this, we switched Reese to a part-time enrollment this year in the district, but he also attends private school part-time, and that is the compensatory education part of our comments. We lost between 2 and 3 years, and we are paying college tuition level payments this year to make up for it. But we wonder how many other families in this district are in this situation and cannot afford the private services. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Sue Yu, please.
Okay, hello, my name's Sue. I'm a junior at Bellevue High School, and we appreciate those in this meeting and other district staff who have reached out to us to discuss with students and update us on what the district is doing. We also thank you for the update and for listening to our demands. This has been mentioned before, but we also want to re-emphasize that the demands that we have spoken about are not the end, and these won't be the only ones brought up. More will arise, and though certain demands might be addressed and met, this is going to be an ongoing process. The process of addressing sexual assault and rape and abuse at our schools will never end anytime soon. And please don't think that you're just finished when the initial demands have been met, which has been mentioned before. We urge you to keep in mind that so many students' lives have been irrevocably altered and they've experienced trauma from the failures of schools and the district. These victims and survivors will not forget, and neither will we or our communities, and we'll continue to be here and show up, whether at these board meetings or other discussion places. Thank you.
Thank you. Jean Yu?
Hi, my name is Jean. I'm a junior at Bellevue High School, and we're here again to keep focused on the process of dealing with sexual assault allegations and the district policies. And students are watching the administration. We're expecting change to be continually prioritized and communicated to students. Even though not all of us can be present here at these board meetings, many of our peers care,
and are extremely invested in this long overdue process of reevaluation and overturning of the status quo. So we are asking that there be a constant reexamination and process of learning and growing about our district's systematic faults, and to really promise that students are cared for as humans first. We really appreciate your investments and time spent on addressing these inadequacies in policy and response. We want to make sure that this work keeps going on with deep and well-rounded student involvement, as well as representation and consistent communication with district families. And I know this was brought up earlier in the meeting, so we don't have like a fully fledged response for how to like communicate that to the students who are unable to be here at these updates. But we were initially thinking about really using social media in the classrooms to communicate that, because like as was mentioned before, email is a tricky process to use when communicating that like information of that type of gravity. So in the classrooms where we are sitting there and present is one, I think, effective way to really address these issues that I'm sure that most of us in the classroom are aware of and involved in. And social media as well is a bit of an easier route to reach students than email. I know Bellevue School District has an Instagram, and I know that many educators do as well, professional and private. So we also urge you to think about going down those routes as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ava, Carol?
Hello again. I and other students have been to the past several months of board meetings, and we want to emphasize that we will not stop coming until the process of providing student support when dealing with sexual assault is reformed and made to prioritize safety and support of our victims. I have had district representatives reach out to me with updates and collaboration on policymaking and responses to the Bellevue High School sexual assault walkout demands. I deeply appreciate this effort towards communication and student representation, but there is still more to be done. There are funds to redistribute and reallocate, student panels and meetings to organize, and emails and updates to send to district families and students. Keep our community involved, both now and continuously.
Thank you. That ends our public comment. We thank you for those who came in person, and we will now move to, I think we have section 5 on our agenda, but I do want to ask, I think Director Chu has never had to miss any part of a school board meeting in the entire time I think I've known her, so tonight is a unusual exception, and she has to leave at 6. So I've asked her offline if she'd like, we could switch the order of numbers 5 and 6 on our agenda, because we had director discussion, and I didn't know if she wanted to participate in that, or if she preferred to hear the superintendent update. So I'm just going to ask you if you have a preference on that.
Well, if the discussion doesn't require having had the updates first, it'd be great to do that first. But if it does, then I don't want to get in the way and undermine the discussion for anybody else.
It actually doesn't. So I'm just going to say, unless that would create a problem for the superintendent, I would ask if we could do that. Okay, then I would.
Thanks.
Let me just ask, does any board member have a objection to essentially changing the order of 5 and 6? Okay, so this is time we had, so I see all nods and no vigorous head shake saying no. So I think with that, we're going to amend our agenda and take what was item 6, director discussion, and move it up. This is just time that I've been trying to find time to just carve out for us to be able to discuss things. Now, the question is, how do we divide up our 40 minutes? And we've tried different things over the years.
Technical point, interjection of technical point.
Sure.
Some of the cameras are arranged so that I can really see the empty public comments podium, and I cannot see either
Okay.
Seema or Christine.
Okay, so I will leave that to Mike Bartz, and,
Okay.
and he can maybe help us while we move forward with the discussion. So the director discussion, we have 40 minutes. We've tried different things in the past tonight. I mean, with a prior board, not with this one. What I think I'm going to try is to just say, okay, we are 6 board members. No, we're 5 board members, but we have 40 minutes. So why don't we try about 6 minutes each? And what we could just do is board member who goes first can raise a topic, and they can either speak to it for the entire time, or we can have a discussion around that topic. And we may find that each of us picks the same topic or not, but knowing that our board often has a lot to talk about, I'm going to propose that we try that tonight. So in the interests of sort of opportunity to speak, and knowing that I believe Director Chu has to leave, am I correct, about 6 o'clock? I'm going to start
No,
with.
I do,
Okay.
but part of the opportunity for me to be here is also to listen.
Okay.
I don't have to always be the first to speak.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead then say alpha order. We'll start with Director Aris. Is that okay, or you'd prefer not? No, don't do that. Okay.
If you want to do that, that's fine, but let's give
Okay.
me a comeback.
Okay, why don't we start with you, because then we'll be able to hear from you, and then we will go to Director Chu, and then we'll just go alpha order all the way down. Does that work?
No, I'm saying go ahead and.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Skip me in
Got
the
it.
alphabetical
Okay,
order. and then
perfectly
come
fine.
back.
Okay, so we'll go to Director Chu. Whatever's on your mind, or whatever you'd like to talk about, it might be.
I don't want to start. I'd really rather listen.
Okay. All right, I'm going to start with Director Shuey. You raised right before public comment. I think the topic of public comment, I think we've spoken offline about the opportunity, and this could be a good time to just talk about some of, I think, what you raised last time. And we frame it around what vision would you like to see us move towards? And maybe we can start there. And if we can, yeah, perfect. The counters.
I had 2 things that I wanted to try to cover during this time, so I'll try to speak quickly. The one is the public comment issue. As I said at the last meeting, and I think that the board members all agreed it would be fantastic and important to include the perspectives of people who are not able, as you said earlier, to be in person, either for physical health reasons, for logistical, financial, all different reasons. And so those voices are really important. I would like at some point in the next 3 minutes to make a motion to ask the district staff to make a proposal, and the items that I think I realize it's a complex issue. A couple of things that I'd like to highlight are that we would still take in-person comments, and my thought is that we could try having half the comments being in person and half them being virtual, or whatever proposal that the district comes up with, and dividing it up between. I know that for the in-person, that my understanding is that it is a first come, first serve, first sign up, first to speak. And for the folks who put in public comments, that we could perhaps randomize and put the names on a randomizer and then choose those people, make sure that they can speak, and that would make it fair. Folks have raised the issue, and I'm sensitive to it, that people could, bomb in the comments, and we would have to have a plan for that if there were sending lots of people that are out of district, or people who are not families and students. And so I would also encourage the staff to look into a mechanism to prioritize, which is based on perhaps being connection, closest of the connection to the community, to the district, and also perhaps whether they've spoken before or recently. And that's all operational, but just wanted to give you some thoughts on what's on my mind, and acknowledging that it's complex. We've done it before, though. In the past, we have had somebody in the district or board member read them. I think it would be great if we could, like we have in the student participation, to have the person who submits the comment actually speak. So those are the things I would love to have the district look into, enabling for people who would be able to participate only remotely.
So I'm wondering if maybe other board directors would like to react to Director Shuey's suggestion, because I think this is supposed to be a discussion time, trying to get us away from the notion we either hear information or recipients or we give direction. I'd love to be able to discuss it, but we'll make sure that we don't leave this without an articulation of a motion whether you make it or one of us makes it, but that we have a real action, because I think that was what I heard you wanting. Am I right?
Well, yeah, I heard General Counsel say that that would perhaps be a good way to make sure that it surfaces and that it's kept in the minutes.
Okay, so is there any board director who has a reaction to that idea?
Yeah, I'm kind of on board with it. I'm sort of wondering if we could, last time we did it wasn't perfect because someone had to read it. I wonder whether we could take 2-minute recordings off of our telephone line, and the person wanting to make the comment would have to, compose the comment and speak it there, and then we could play the recording. It's just something to investigate. But also, I went to some public comment training at the WASDA Law Conference, and one thing was, they were really advising first come, first serve, because you don't want to have any perception that someone's poking through, prioritizing the comments according to topic or point of view or anything like that. So they said the easiest way would be to do that way. So I think some investigation about the best practices, since we seem to have differing, even legal opinions. We've heard different things from different lawyers. We might want to look into that before we go forward.
I would suggest that maybe we look into some of the other entities that does the public comment. I know the Bellevue Council does online still, and they do have public comments. It may be worth looking into how they've solved that problem. I'm in favor of having a split where you have in-person and online, because we do have community members who can't be here, would like to still have that comment heard from their own voice.
Director Chu?
So I just want to say, if Director Shui wants to put a motion forth, I'd certainly second and support it to have this looked into as something to pursue. I just want to clarify, I don't think that in the 6-minute discussion time we have allocated for it tonight, we will solve the nuances of it. So it's good that everyone's kind of raising the issues that need to go into that thing. And I know that staff is exceedingly strapped right now, and we're in the midst of changing a board coordinator. So I think we have to set realistic expectations. It's critical to hear from our community, but I would prefer that we set expectations that are sustainable and realistic so that we have this nailed, so that when we are ready to do all the superintendent search work this spring, that it's in awesome shape to use. And so we don't do a half of a solution just to rush it.
I'm actually really glad you brought that up, because I think that is that's the question for us. So if we formulate a motion, I think, across what everybody said, I tend to agree. We're going to need the district, because this is something operational, but if we're asking the district to go deep dive and come back with a proposal, they're clearly going to need to get a layer of legal review. I think Director Aris's point about benchmarking against other practices that are done that are effective is a really good one. And but I think Director Chu's hit it on the head in terms of, like, we keep asking these things, and so what's realistic? And so how can we propose something that is effective? Because I think what Director Watson talked about is true. We tried this during the pandemic. I think it didn't go super successfully, partly because I don't know that everybody thought we were doing it in a viewpoint neutral way, even though that was in fact the goal. People questioned it. So we would have to do it in a way that people feel that they can tell that it's fair, they understand how it works. So,
and that's why I was on the outside at the other end. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Dr. Servan.
No, you're all good. You're all good. Go ahead. It's a discussion. So good.
Yeah, so having been on the other side of it at that time, there wasn't, from my perspective, a lot of transparency of how it was decided. There was, we selected a random sampling, but it wasn't like we put everything into a little bubble popper and came up with these 6 names or whatever. And so that's why I think there was a perception from the community. But I do believe that if we benchmark, like Director Aris said, that we can find a way that is transparently known to be equitable. And following up on something that Director Chu said a second ago, I do think that while we want it to work as smoothly as possible, that inevitably there are going to be, sort of bumps, and we'll just need to smooth them out as we go. low. And so I think that it's important to try to get those voices, because even like it's notable to me that we haven't had any public comment on COVID tonight, which is on the minds of a lot of people in the community. But I think that the people who would be more inclined to speak to that are not the people who are going to be in person. So I think it's that's just one example. I think that we're missing out on voices, and that it's important that we put something in place as soon as possible.
Okay, so with that, would you like to make a motion for us to consider? Director Shui, would you like to take a little time?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. I'd like to move that the district make a preliminary proposal as how regarding how to accommodate public comment remotely, and have a at least draft proposal back to us or some preliminary report by the next board meeting.
I don't know if, I'm wondering, and I'm just gonna, before I consider a second, I'm wondering if we might want to modify the timing. I don't know, and so for that reason, I'm just gonna ask the superintendent, in light of the desire to ensure that if we're gonna do something that's in depth, have legal review, and also have benchmarking. I don't know if that turnaround is realistic if we want depth and breadth. So
if we can have further discussion on it, and that's why I tried to make the motion as in at least an update, right? A proposal or an update on where we are on that possibility.
Second.
Okay, so then let's discuss.
May I make a suggestion with respect to wording? As the board is part of the district, I would identify that the motion be, I move that the superintendent and staff explore the option of remote public commentary at school board meetings and provide the board with an update at a board meeting for a date certain, not yet determined. And I will write that down so that it is clear.
I hear you. That means then the motion would partly be directing the district to tell us when they would come back with their proposal?
It would give the board the opportunity to determine at some point other than tonight when it would consider the information that is being provided to the board.
Because I think the point, one of the points, the meta points that's being made here that we should pay attention to is we are all the district. We are asking the superintendent to do something and to come back to the board with a recommendation. When I heard the proposal, the only thing I heard that really didn't seem to take into account the spirit of what Joyce was trying to get across, in my view.
I've lost audio.
Sorry?
I'm sorry, I lost audio. I think I lost you, Director Watson, for about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I lost audio on everything.
Oh, okay, so Director, did you hear our general counsel?
Yes.
Okay, so Director Chu, if you don't mind, if you can.
Oh, sorry, Director Chu.
So two things that I made a point of. One is let's be careful and recognize that we're all the district. That was part of the point, the meta point being made by legal. We are the district. We as the board are requesting the superintendent to do something. The second thing is that I didn't think that the proposal that was given honored the spirit of one part of Joyce's proposed motion, and that was that by saying the date indeterminate, it wasn't quite what she was looking for. So I would suggest it be amended to say, and would bring the superintendent to bring in, like, whatever the last words were, to say an update or a proposal by the next board meeting. And that gives the flexibility to come with an update and say, hey, you know, we've looked into this so far and here's when we'll give you some more information, or to come and say, we've got a proposal, it's done, here you go.
I'm not sure where we are in the motions and the modifications, but that did capture what I intended to have be part of my original motion. Thank you.
So I suggest it be, I move that the superintendent and staff explore the option of remote public commentary and provide either an update regarding the same or a proposal regarding the same at the next regular business meeting. Board's
so
next.
Moved. Yes,
Second.
that's my motion.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. Excuse me? Oh, yes, we still have more time to discuss. So, yes,
I would take my time now if it's okay, because you had said 6 minutes. I think
you
we've gone
should,
15.
you should, you should.
All right, so I am going to be very brief tonight, unusual, but I'll try. I have a couple things that I think are super important that I want to articulate. One, I would ask the superintendent that when the work is being done for the, this is a personal ask, you guys can weigh in. When the work is being done on the HIB and sexual harassment and other policies about student life, that one thing that you consider making a recommendation on is how and when we intentionally refresh and look at those policies. Like, should it be on a 7-year cycle, a 3-year cycle, a 5-year cycle? Is it the policy? Is it the procedure? I don't have an answer. I would just ask that you think about some way, because the kids asked for, constantly giving something attention. And the reality is that sustained attention on something is not fully realistic unless there's kind of some forcing functions or points or whatever. So I just wonder if that could be considered. I don't have a particular solution. The second thing I want to cover is sort of related to board development that's going to be talked about later, and sort of related to the special education stuff that has come up. So I just want, these are very important points to me. I think that board development wise, I am deeply appreciative of all the time and energy. Director Serafin said earlier today, I don't think we've ever spent so much time iterating on a board development policy, and I think she's right. And I really do appreciate the work that's been put into it. I think we have some points that will be good for the legal discussion about how we can share feedback on those in productive ways, and how different people can participate in proposing options. But the important thing, I think, for me is that if I had to pick just 2 things that our board focused on development-wise for this year, it would be the superintendent search, which is in part development. It's not just a thing to be done. You need to do it right. And governance, and what it means to govern and how to govern. And so one of the things that I think came up tonight is the special education report. And it's a great thing that we're doing. We're working on inclusion. We have a pilot. Our special education team, our staff, have been exceedingly dedicated for years of time. We are so lucky to have Kristen Callisto Wang in place. The work she does is phenomenal. And what I said about the special education report relates to how do we have a governance conversation about the feedback we get from families over the last 10 years? What is the right way for us to monitor and think about that? So the report that has been presented to us is more of an educative report. It's not a data report. It doesn't really help us as a board understand, hey, we've actually been doing inclusive practices in our district for many years. Now we're talking about doing a pilot on inclusive services. How does that all connect? What did we invest in before? What did it do for our kids? What was the outcome for our children and the investment we made before? And what's the next outcome? There was a comment made during the meeting on Monday where I said, what are we going to measure? How will we know beyond like kids spent minutes? We care about the quality of the minutes they spent. And I was told, well, we care about engagement. We look at engagement. And I thought, well, I do know we care about that, but I don't know where to point to it. I don't know where I can see whether or not it's improved. I don't know if I, as a board director, when I approve budgets or goals, am actually like approving something that's going somewhere. And I care about that because I hear from our families, I hear from many of our staff, particularly about how much time our paras are given to prepare and do things. And I hear from our kids and parents that the experiences aren't everything that they are hoping for and aren't necessarily meeting all their needs. And that I also hear about great things that are done by our teachers and by our planning staff and our special education services. What I want to figure out is how do we have a governance conversation about special education so that we as a board can help set the right direction and then can actually support the exceptional efforts that are being made by our staff. It has to go beyond a discussion of, hey, look, we're doing this new best practice. What's the data? What are our kids getting out of it? How is the quality outcome falling into place? Where did it fall short? Why are we investing in this? And how will we know if it's working? So that's the conversation that I was trying to precipitate. And I apologize if what I said was counterproductive but I don't apologize for raising the issue about the discussion. I know that I don't always raise things in the most approachable way, and I'm working on that. But I think this is critical to me. Like, and I know it is critical to me and to others that we find a way to have an appropriate governance conversation, not a conversation that interferes in the day-to-day operations. And I also want to note that in the special education services area, what I made a comment about whether or not our special education kids may have had higher impacts. Now, in some ways, we actually brought them back into in-person learning, many of them, not all of them, sooner, but many of them couldn't come back sooner because they had more complicated situations. And so I said that I do think that the complexity and the implications on some of the students receiving these services is greater than the average. And so it behooves us to spend some additional attention. I'm not questioning whether or not we as a district complied with the requirements. What I'm questioning is knowing where our children are at and knowing they may have experienced disproportionate gaps just because of the circumstances. What are we doing and how will we know if we're actually helping with that? So that's what I wanted to focus on. And that's why I think like there is room for the development proposal to evolve and get a little bit focused. If we go with it, you know, great, we'll go with it. Maybe we'll see opportunities to evolve it, but governance and search, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, well, I want to invite people to kind of jump on the conversation you started around the special education discussion, just continuing it. But the one thing I'll just point out for what it's worth is I actually agree with you about the metrics and the need to understand them for governance. It's why we actually are not spending 1 but 2 sessions just on what metrics do we use, why do we use them, how do we use them. It is because when I tried to flesh this out, I thought of time urgency. One is superintendent search. So you'll see most of the extra sessions around superintendent search. Second, I have instruction in era of COVID, which really is something that is time sensitive, because if we don't get to that, the ship will sail before we can get to things that need to be planned now. But really, strategic plan development is actually, in my view, Christine, is the kind of, if we don't get our view of where we want to go in alignment with what superintendent search we do, we will find a superintendent who'll come and say, and so what do you want me to do now? We need to do those in parallel. So I hear you. I think what we can do is, you know, if I propose this tonight, we can consider it. First of all, it only goes through June by design, because I figured our whole board should help as we get going, figure out the second half of the year. But I just want to point that out. I see Carolyn's hand is raised, and I think both she and Jane and Joyce may want to.
Thanks everyone for indulging me. I'm sorry that I have to leave. And
Okay.
I do not disagree that strategic direction setting can't be part of the governance.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Director Chu's leaving, as I said, I think that's the first time in 4 years. So it's highly unusual, and she has something a lot going on. So thank you. Director Watson?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I've seen a lot of board development plans in the past, and I think this one is excellent, and in fact, the best one I've ever seen. And I think that it looks like there's, you know, too many sessions and too much going on only because we have now included, we've taken a different approach on the board. What I'm trying to say is it's not really true. The old development plans, some of them were just like 5 or 6 bullet points of we're going to cover 6 topics, and then we got better about them and we fleshed them out more. But what Seema has done here is something new. She's included the things that are going to happen during the regular board meetings in addition to the things that are going to happen at workshops, in addition to the things that are going to happen around the superintendent search. So it's simply more comprehensive. So I just think it's excellent, and it looks a little different than what we had in the past, only because it includes all those things that used to be done on separate pieces of paper.
Well, thank you. I think the only thing I will just say for people to know is this has not necessarily been easy for the district, because I've basically asked them to pull things forward that they were planning to do later. So Melanie McGee and probably John Harrison are sick of me, but what I was trying to do is have relevance to things that got presented here. to us in our regular sessions and figure out how we could then make them matter in terms of timing. So if we are we got a presentation on assessments, but then a lot of us were wondering, but we really are more interested on maybe grading, or could we learn more about how grading works? We also heard about we were going to get a presentation on virtual education, and we asked, could we really focus it on the virtual academy so that we're not too late in setting up our expectations as a board for what could happen next year. So I agree, and I just wanted to say part of how that worked was the district was very flexible, and I appreciate that. So thank you. And thank you, Director Watson. I want to go back to, if I can, even though she's gone, but Director Chu talked about special education and the conversation we had the other day. Does anybody want to comment on that?
It's funny, it's just like what you were just saying. We wanted to talk about, maybe we were more interested in grading and we got assessment. And I think one of the things that happened is that I just thought that recovery services was top of mind and the number one thing we should be talking about. And inclusion is a fine topic. I just thought it wasn't as high as recovery services on the list. So maybe there's just like a communication disconnect there that we can resolve.
Yeah, I mean, I think for those who are listening, we had the opportunity to ask the superintendent questions, and just for some context, I've just got to give the superintendent credit, because what I had asked him was, can we find a way to be able to ask you questions before our board meeting? And in the past, that usually would go through the board president, like we'd send questions and it would come back and forth on email, and what we might get is in the middle of the board meeting some answers to some of our questions, but sometimes it felt too late, and then we'd get the answers in the next board meeting. So what Director Jarvis agreed to do was he said, I can either try to do it in sort of one-to-one discussions, or if you want, we can just have a meeting with 2 of you or all of you. And he agreed, we'll do all of you, and we'll have it in a live open session. And so we did that for the first time basically on Tuesday. And in that discussion, for those who may not know, we ended up talking about the report that was coming up, but we, as Director Chu and Watson, Aris, and Shui, we all went down the path of asking more about recovery of services, particularly during the pandemic. And so that is where most of our focus went. So I don't know if we lost Director Shui, so I'm going to ask Director Aris. I think she might have some thoughts or comments.
Yeah, so just to point out, the presentation on the inclusion, or that was originally, or what we were discussing earlier this week, you know, I think it's a fine topic. I think that what we need to kind of focus on is, you know, the way I see it as myself as sitting on the board is, how do I aid our district to improve? How do we make it move forward versus just being a status quo? And so it's not to negate, when we ask questions, it's not to negate all the hard work the district does. It's not to negate the energy that is put behind. I think I stated at that meeting how I get it. I sat on that side and worked 70 hours a week as a special ed teacher and doing everything we could humanly do. So I get that part. I think the questions were asked and is, how do we take that information and put it in a way that we can help ask the right questions to make it better? Or if you're going to put in a pilot program, and this is presented to us as a pilot program, okay, how are we going to measure it? How is it different from what it was before? How is it going? What's the change? And then how do we measure it to make sure that it is working, or if it's not working, how do we change that? So I think those are the concerns that I heard during that meeting, and I would say for any things that is brought to us, I think that is the spirit that we're asking questions. It is not to negate the positive work or the hard work that the district is putting forth. It is for us to help bring light to things maybe that it was oversaw, seen. And so I hope our community, our educators and staff understand that it is not to say we don't hear you and we don't see you. It is more of how can we help you maybe address or bring a question that has not been thought of.
Yeah, I just want to second that point. I mean, because I think it's really about having the growth mindset of being able to look and say, that's great, and what are the opportunities for improvement? And I think for me, post-COVID in particular, Director Jarvis, I mean, I thought all of what you said is true, and we know many families are simply not where they need to be, and we know this, we hear it from them, so we would be falling down on our job if we didn't make sure that you heard that from us. So I think that was the spirit sort of in which I think we all spoke. But I want to make sure Director Shuey too, if you had any thoughts in response to what Director Aris said, or Director Chu before her. I think you dropped off for a moment. I want to make sure you had a chance to speak.
Yeah, no further. Thank you.
I do have a question regarding, and not regarding special ed, but well, kind of dyslexia. We've had community members bringing concerns about data-driven curriculum addressing the needs of the law that's been passed 3 years ago around dyslexia. Is it something that we could discuss as a board, and how can we help and aid that process, especially since there is a law set?
I think a question would be, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is possibly two possibilities. One is, do we want to ensure that maybe we get an update at some point from the superintendent or staff on that progress, and that might come in the form, maybe not of a, I realize in terms of the piling on to the many things that are already forthcoming. I just want to ask, I guess, if we have a discussion without first being grounded in what's happening, then our discussion won't be rooted in reality or fact. So it feels like the first step, maybe to Director Aris's point, is to know, we've heard the public comments, but we don't really know kind of the response or the thoughts from the district. So what's a good time to be able to get that that's realistic, but also obviously timely?
Yeah.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just going to second that for this dyslexia discussion. I really would like some history on it, because, you know, what I can remember, I remember that this type of instruction has been, you know, debated going way back. I want to say like 20 years ago, people were debating literacy instruction. So I would like to know, like, what our current state of literacy instruction is in terms of the whole phonics or not phonics, and what this law, you know, more about the law and what our current practices are, what we're changing them to. I want to get grounded from the district's perspective in this, because I am, how do I say this? I'm listening with great interest to what the people with the public comments are saying, and I have read books that are more on their point of view. So I want to get the whole background. So I would appreciate that.
You know, I feel like I just put the superintendent on the spot, but the other option too is for me to work with tomorrow when we look at kind of the post-meeting takeaways. We could look and say, is there an option or an opportunity in our upcoming sessions, our development sessions, or other sessions, to fold this in, or to replace something we have, or to use this as an example as we discuss a topic. So that could be something that Superintendent Jarvis, we could discuss, unless you had something ready to propose.
I'm not sure where to start this answer, so I'm just going to jump in. But if Director Chu were still here, I'm going to agree with her that the large issue is governance. Somebody walked to the podium tonight and talked about dyslexia, and suddenly we're having a conversation about replacing all of the, or some of the things we're going to talk about with this is a more important topic. I don't disagree with dyslexia and the law. A couple days ago, we had the conversation on special education. I've now received multiple communications, including from the PTSA group, that we were somehow in one of the 45 districts that had failed, when in fact we got a significant report that said everything was very good, with the exception they offered help on one area, which is disproportionality, which is a notorious topic that you have all talked about repeatedly in special education. And interestingly enough, the report that was on the agenda for special education of inclusion is the remedy for the disproportionality, the one area that was designated. But it's come out in the last 24 hours of how many ways we're failing as a district, and that hurts the district, it hurts the department, it hurts the program. And I say that in a sense of, I guess my commitment as the time I'm here is going to be to try to deal with, how do we talk governance? How do we deal with the fact that we should be a growth district? I think we are a growth district, and I think when we talk tonight, I hope we're getting a chance to deal with the social emotional. Just one piece of data. This district from the 1920 school year to this 21-22 school year went from 4.5 people committed to social emotional to 17.7 certificated staff committed to the issue of wellness for kids in anticipation of response to the COVID. People ask me why I'm so committed to the in-person, and why didn't we just swing to the easier route of virtual? And my answer is because it's not as healthy for our kids. We're seeing the academic loss, but we're also seeing the need for social emotional. The reason I'm wandering in that wilderness is that we've got some absolutely outstanding people and programs, and I'm hearing them labeled as failures because somebody has heard a number of people say that it didn't work for them. There's a dispute process that is very much in use in this district and needed in Bellevue. I think people represent themselves and their family well. And I don't mean to go on and on and on as much as to say that we can pull together the dyslexia report and we can shift staff priorities. Right now I can't, because we're tying up virtually everybody in this room on trying to keep schools open in person. But we can shift the priority, but somewhere we are not operating yet as the way, how does the school board govern? How does the superintendent have the freedom to direct the staff? How do we stay on course and not get blown around every time that somebody has a problem? And it may be a very real problem. I'm not trying to blow it off, but it doesn't mean that we can shift directions or priorities. So I bless you for the effort on board development. I think we need to get better working as a team, and the staff is paying, every eye is on us right now, trying to say they need some assistance to know how to get the work done and not be sort of either battered and or demeaned, or in a discussion about growth that doesn't start and end with this is bad and it's been bad for a long time and it must be bad people because you haven't fixed it. So I guess I'm just responding in the same conversation of I'm taking more than my 6 minutes, but I think it's necessary to have that conversation, and I think Director Chu actually touched on that. We talk about the micromanagement of what does it look like if a board is micromanaging, and balanced governance and superintendent, and what's accountability in that. I think we've got work to do, and I feel somewhat like the teacher that I get to say I taught it, but I obviously haven't been very good at it yet. So I need to keep working at that, working with you. So I thank you for just giving me a few minutes to respond to that, because It's not that there's anything wrong with raising the issue of dyslexia and the law. I can guarantee you there's enough expertise in this room to be at the very top of the state of Washington in terms of dealing with dyslexia and where we are and what we're doing. Is it fast enough for some? Undoubtedly not. Is it the number one priority that's been identified in all of the plans? Probably not at this point. So there's my statement of it starts with, this is a very good place with very good staff. We have got to get better at figuring out how do we approach it in ways and areas that we want to improve.
Okay, so I'm going to say that actually ends our discussion time. The light is flashing. I think I gave you my 6 minutes by default, and that's fine. I think I will just wrap up and say, I think what I heard you say was not disagreeing with Director Chu's initial statement, but rather saying, don't lose perspective and examine, explore in the name of growth, but we can't change the priorities every time somebody raises something, and that's fair. I think that goes to perspective. Having heard Director Aris's question about dyslexia, I will work and see what is reasonable and when we can put that on our calendar. But I hear you. We won't be turning the ship all the way around and going a completely different direction every week. So understand that. Okay, with that, I'm inclined to take, I'm sorry, we have to.
Yeah, I just had a point of process here.
Everyone got 5 or 10, if not more minutes, and I apologize. I just don't know how we can keep going if I don't move forward. I'm going to just ask at this time that we take a 5-minute break because we've been at this for over 2 hours, almost 2 hours. We take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we go to what we had skipped before, which was item 5, superintendent update for sense of belonging, social emotional learning, and coping skill. We do have some people who are presenting tonight who have a very hard stop, and I'm worried we won't get to their content if we don't move forward. So maybe we actually take a 4-minute break and we start back at 6:32, if that's okay, and then we'll pick up and we'll keep going. Thank you.
Hello? Oh. Oh. Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, I have to really take advantage of this few-minute break, but yeah, I just felt like, you know, it seemed, well, this session was sort of like, it seems like the expectation was that the topic that we would raise would be the most important question prioritized, when I thought it was just an open discussion. I didn't mean drop everything and go to dyslexia. I meant, well, that's top of mind right now because someone mentioned it. I am.
to start with, we're going to go back to what was originally item 5, for which we flipped the order. We have 15 minutes on a discussion that's really grounded in, sorry, if you don't mind, we're starting. It's really grounded in 2 reports that were provided by the district and shared previously. There's a report on sense of belonging and student well-being and a sense of belonging. And we also have, it covers social emotional learning as well. And we also have coping skills. So across all of those topics, I think the understanding is we can and would read the reports, but we at a high level are going to hear from the superintendent through an update because these are part of our annual plan priority objectives. And these are the reports in support of those. So,
thank you, Madam President. Melanie McGee and I are going to try to keep it shorter than we would have, other knowing that you've got some time pressures. But I'd like to introduce it by way of, again, the newcomer to the district. And in these 6 months, one of the most pleasant surprises and learning that I have done was to realize what the Bellevue School District had set up for themselves on student wellness and coping skills and the multi-year effort that started with your own strategic plan. But between the years of the 1920 and the present year, to ramp up in anticipation that one of the most important things you could possibly do was tend to the student wellness in a time in which relationships had been put into the virtual world, and the world of student well-being was dark and murky and very, very difficult. But the anticipation was we were going to see things that we were hurting and watching kids hurting. So I say that by way of introduction of learning about MHAT, learning about the SOS, learning about the counseling program. These 3 areas that you have identified really are, for all practical purposes, blended together in this report. And I'm going to leave that at that point, and you can say blessedly stop talking, because I'm going to ask Melanie to highlight the mid-year progress that I think you will be very pleased in terms of, is Bellevue School District participating to help kids' social well-being, their mental health, and their coping skills in a tough, tough time? And I think you'll see the answer is absolutely yes. Melanie, would you take it from there?
I will do my best. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me okay? Great. Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. Before I get started, I just want to acknowledge and thank our incredible student well-being team across the district. That includes our central office staff. It includes our administrators in our school buildings, our educators, our counselors, our MHAT team. There's so many people, and they really are the true heroes who are out there doing this work every day, making a difference for our students. I also want to acknowledge and thank all of the staff members who helped contribute and write this report to be able to share the progress with you. So I may be up here having the honor of sharing, but this really truly was a collaborative team effort, and just want to acknowledge and thank all of those who helped to create this. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. As Dr. Jarvis said, this is one of our annual plan progress reports, and we're very proud to share with you where we are at the middle of the year with our student well-being progress. As Dr. Jarvis said, student well-being is a high priority in the Bellevue School District. In fact, it's the first goal in our strategic plan. 4 years ago, when we wrote that goal to affirm and inspire students, and the goal for student well-being is that students feel safe, affirmed, and inspired to achieve high levels of social emotional well-being, regardless of background. It was important for us at the time. Now more than ever, in the midst of COVID, we reaffirm our commitment to our students. Each year, as part of our planning process, we develop annual targets in service to those strategic plan goals. And as Madam Serafan alluded to and Dr. Jarvis, we have 3 priority objectives in our annual plan this year. One is to increase the students who report a sense of belonging on the Panorama Student Survey with a reduction in disproportionality between students and all subgroups. Our second priority objective is to increase social emotional competency in grades 3 through 5 and grades 6 through 12 when we look at the fall data from this year and compare that to the spring data that we've not yet collected. And our third objective is really around increasing coping skills. And I just want to take a minute to frame how that fits in and how that shows up for our students in the class. Those first two priority objectives are tied very closely to our universal social emotional cell instruction that we provide to all students. That third objective on coping skills, it can be kind of a nebulous term and can kind of trip some folks up. So I just want to take a minute to explain what that actually is. It really includes those students who we've identified through multiple different means in the district, screeners, diagnostic tools, input from educators, schools, and families, who may need some additional support beyond what's provided to all students. And for those students, they receive Tier 2 or Tier 3 mental health support. And we want to track and monitor their progress in working on whatever skill they've identified or area of need they may have. And it ranges and varies. It could include executive functioning skills. It could include some work around anxiety and depression. And so when we say coping skills, we're using that as more of a generalized term based on whatever the student is working on. So I hope that makes sense. As you know, we're entering the third year of our global pandemic in COVID-19. And so really, to be able to bring this information to you tonight and to share the progress that we've made and what we've seen in normal times, we're be quite proud. And in COVID times, we're just incredibly proud. So a few things I want to point out for you just to highlight. I don't want to go through the report. I'm sure you've read it. But under priority objective number 1, sense of belonging, as you can see in the data that we've provided, we see that overall, all students in all of the grade bands, 3 through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, reported an increase in sense of belonging this year when we compare it to fall of 2019. And as a reminder, we don't look back at fall of 2020 for sense of belonging. We had changed the measure last year to be focused on peer connection, and that was due to the remote learning environment and then the hybrid environment that we were in at the time. The sense of belonging questions are specific to when students are in the building. And so we're so pleased to see that all of the students experienced an increase. So in that respect, we have met the first part of our annual target. Now, the second part of the annual target is to decrease the disproportionality among subgroups. We've not yet met that, but we are still working towards it. You'll note that we see tremendous increases among students who identify as Black. And in fact, you can see that they've reported an increase of 8 to 14 percentage points over the last 14 years. Prior to making student well-being one of our top priorities in the strategic plan, we had been relatively flat in our sense of belonging data. But with intentional focus and practice and schools really digging into their data and working to customize their support, we're seeing a positive impact for our students. Now, you may have noticed a discrepancy when you compare elementary students to middle school and high school students. There's a noticeable drop-off in the percentage of students who feel a sense of belonging. And we reached out to our partners with Panorama to try to find out a little bit more information as to why that might be so. Even here in our district, that's been a trend pre-pandemic as well. We've seen a dip from elementary going into middle school. And some folks think that might have something to do with the structure and the way that elementary schools are set up. Students generally are with one teacher and one group of students for the majority of their day, which offers a multitude of opportunities to create a community and a sense of belonging. Once they get into middle school, that changes, and students now have multiple teachers with multiple different sets of students, and that could impact that ability to be able to really feel that strong sense of belonging. In addition, when we think about students and the development of adolescence, we also recognize that as they get into middle school, it's natural for them to start questioning who they are as individuals and where they fit in with other groups. That too can impact the level and the sense of belonging that they may feel. Looking to the future, we want to continue to focus on the groups of students that we have not yet reached. And in fact, we're already working to address some of those gap areas. That includes strengthening our language routines and other pedagogical practices to support and affirm language learners in all of our classrooms. We're also working to strengthen our inclusive practices, which you've heard a little bit about tonight, and we'll hear more in a little while. And that's really to help our students who have disabilities to feel as they are part of the general education community. I'm going to shift now and talk for a few minutes about priority objective number 2, CEL competencies. This is the second year that we've conducted the CEL survey in our district, and we're very pleased to see that even in the midst of a pandemic, the student responses are holding steady and even somewhat improving. This is indicating to us that students are developing their social emotional skills. And in fact, when we look at national percentiles, we can see that our elementary students are in the 80th to 99th percentile for favorable responses on the 4 CEL competencies that we measure, which are around self-management, social awareness, self-efficacy, and emotional regulation. Another bright spot that we look at has to do with one of those tools that I mentioned earlier in terms of how students are identified who may be in need of additional support. There's a teacher perception survey, and they have an opportunity to look at their students and identify who may be in need of additional instruction. We've seen a downward trend in our district over the past few years that we're quite pleased to share with you tonight. And in fact, this year it was at 6%. This suggests to us that our universal Tier 1 social emotional learning instruction is having a positive impact on our students. That's not to say that everything is all sunshine and roses. As you may have heard, educators have noted that many students across all different backgrounds have been impacted in one way or another by not being in person for the past 18 months for learning. This is reinforcing a greater need for CEL instruction. We're so fortunate here in Bellevue to have already started CEL instruction and have curriculum that folks are using. Now that they're seeing a greater need, we're finding that it's being implemented with even more fidelity and consistency and with greater understanding of the importance. As you might imagine, there is less dedicated time for intentional CEL instruction in middle school. And you may notice that there's a difference in middle school, the secondary grades 6 through 12, compared to the elementary schools in terms of where students are reporting positive responses on their CEL competencies. We hear from many educators that they have a tension between trying to teach all of their subject area content while also still teaching CEL intentionally. This varies across our district, and it's especially true this year as students are coming back with some unfinished learning. There's a pressure that they want to try to get through all of that content. We have some schools who are exploring ways that they can more intentionally embed that in our secondary schools as part of the day. You may have also noticed that self-efficacy is less than the other CEL skills that we manage. And it's important to point out what those self-efficacy questions actually include. They're in the report for you in the back in the appendix, and you'll notice they really are around the extent to which students feel that they can complete the homework and the work in the class that's assigned and be able to carry that forward and remember it in future years. It's a little bit different than what some other folks may think of when they hear that term self-efficacy. And so we just want to be aware of those questions as well. We do want to dig in and find out more from our students as to why they may feel that way. And again, this is the second year that we've done this survey, so there's a lot of opportunity there for us to continue to learn. Shifting over to priority objective number 3, coping skills, which I talked about earlier, we're very pleased to share that of our students who have been identified for additional support and who are receiving support through our district, 91% of elementary students and 96% of secondary students are reporting an increase in their coping skills. We're identifying and serving more students social emotionally this year than we ever have before. And as Dr. Jarvis alluded to, this is something that has been in the works in our district for a few years now. In fact, 4 years ago, we started exploring our mental health assistant team with just a small pilot at one high school. This year, we're proud to say that we've grown the number of employees that we have, mental health assistants team professionals, and we now have approximately 18 serving throughout the district. We've also expanded the screening that we do, growing from just 7th and 10th graders last year to include all 7th through 10th graders this year, to really try to dig in and find out which students may not have been on our radar before and connect them with support services. To meet our longer term student well-being goals, especially as we come out of the pandemic, a key next step will be to continue to strengthen Tier 1, especially at the secondary level. And we'd also like to explore ways that we can increase mental health services in the elementary. That means people, of course, and so that's always a challenge as we move forward. We're fortunate this year and going into next year to have ESSER funds that we've been able to allocate towards this. As we look ahead and as we measure and continue to monitor the impact of having those professionals, we'll need to think about ways, if we want to continue with that, where we find those funding streams. There's no doubt that COVID-19 has shown a spotlight on the need for social emotional well-being, and we are so incredibly proud of our district, of our staff, of our students, of our educators for continuing to prioritize students' social emotional needs. Again, as Dr. Jarvis alluded to earlier, in the current surge that we're in right now, our very immediate and urgent priority is to keep our students who want to be in person with us. We want to be able to continue offering those services. And to do that, we really do have an all hands on deck approach. Folks every day are deployed out to schools doing all different kinds of testing and filling in and subbing for students, because we see how important it is and how impactful it is for students to have an opportunity to continue to learn in person with their peers. So with that, again, I just want to say thank you to the team and to Dr. Jarvis, and I'll turn it back over to you now, President Serafin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I realize there might be questions. The challenge with flipping the order of this with the discussion is we really we won't be able to get through tonight because we have some staff who have to leave sharp right at 8 p.m. or before, and we were actually supposed to be done by 7:25. But so I would ask that we keep going with our agenda. If there's anybody who has a concern, let me know. Otherwise, I would probably be inclined to keep going. Director Aris, I think you're raising your hand, so go ahead.
I very much appreciate your presentation and clarifying the differences between elementary and middle school and discrepancy there. That was a concern of mine. I understand that it is different from, what is it, if I heard this correctly, 2020 to 2021? Did I hear that correctly in the changes? Or was that changes, the date of change? Was it from, you alluded to 2020? Is there, okay, maybe yeah, I'm looking at sense of belonging data.
Yes, the sense of belonging domain that we look at the data from that. The last time that we had measured that domain was in fall of 2019.
Okay.
Last year, when we were in remote instruction for the majority of the year, we had shifted that metric.
Okay.
And instead looked at peer connection.
I see. Okay, and so this year is peer connection. Last year was peer connection.
Yes,
this year.
And this year it's sense of belonging.
Okay, got it. Just if you could give me a little bit of detail on, I see glaring red on Pacific Islander percentage for 2021. Is that because we have the student? I mean, I know we've lost a lot of students and we gained students. Is this based upon students who are not part of the program and therefore the data looks different, or?
Pacific Islander is one of our smaller subgroups. The N size is small, and therefore any change in student number can have a greater change to the total percentage.
Yeah, that's, I just wanted that clarification.
Yes.
Because I think people don't realize that component there.
Mm-hmm.
And also, just a positive note, I just want to tell you, a family who just moved into our district this January has shared their kids are thrilled to be here. They the sense of belonging that they felt. Their kids are their two siblings, and they're in the best relationship ever because they love going to school. And that sense of belonging obviously is very well felt by new students. And so kudos to the district.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
So thank you. I think I'm likely I can anticipate that there might be, more discussion or questions, and I'm just going to suggest, in the interests of board directors being able to talk in the future, Superintendent, we might have, questions that maybe we'll make sure get directed to you. If there's people who have questions they didn't ask them on our Tuesday session about the reports that were submitted, but we will find a way to ensure that any other questions or opportunities just comment, perhaps we can pull them forward to another meeting. I just want to make sure that we are able to get to the other topics. I'm going to go ahead and say right now, thank you to Melanie McGee for the great presentation, and to the reports that were prepared. With still things that I'd love to talk about, I'm going to go ahead and move to board business and ask if maybe we can just consider, maybe we can shrink this down to not from 15 minutes to maybe a little bit less so that we don't run out of time tonight. So let's see if we can do this in 10 minutes. We have policy 3241, which is here for a second reading. I believe Executive Director Harrison might have worked on this, I believe, with Director Watson, but I could be wrong. Vice President Watson, sorry. Could I ask you individually or together to maybe address and remind us what happened between the first and second reading and where we are?
I'll just kind of set it up, and then I'm going to turn it over to Directors Watson and Shui, who worked with me. I had the pleasure of working with to make some changes. So in the document, you'll notice that the change.
Is your microphone on?
It is. I think so. It is. Yeah, my mask is working really well. How's that? The red font was what you saw last time. The blue font is the changes that were made by the directors and I since the last time you met. And it was a pleasure working with the two of you. And I'll just turn it over to you to kind of talk a little bit about what we tried to do here. So either Director Shui or Director Watson, do you want to jump in? Or would you like me to?
Go ahead, Director Watson, if you'd like.
I think everybody's shy tonight. Which one's
Yeah,
going to
I'm
jump?
sorry, I don't know what exactly we need to
I think
explain.
any kind of anecdotal thoughts you have, I think we've had a chance to look at it. If there's anything that needs to change.
I'm happy to jump in really quickly and just summarize that we tried to take what was provided back to us in terms of feedback last time, or what the five of us and at the last board meeting discussed, and in particular, one item that we wanted to just clarify is that the representative that is chosen by the PTSA would be somebody who represents students and families, to clarify that it does not need to be a PTSA member, and to also acknowledge that there may be somebody who is even not a current parent, who may be somebody who is poised because of their experience themselves as a student in the Bellevue School District in the past, or for some other reason, because they've come from a background that's been disparately impacted by these issues, so that we just make it clear that the PTSA, in choosing the person that they will choose, has that flexibility and objective in mind. Director Watson was there, and Executive
No, I think that the two things were, the two major points is that we want to select somebody who can really represent the people who haven't been represented in this process, or with that sort of sense, and also that we want a group that does not report directly to the superintendent to do the selecting, so it's fully independent. And the person who's selected does not have to be a PTSA member, and as Joyce pointed out, does not have to be a current parent. We were talking a little bit about, what if it is a recent graduate who's now an adult who has some perspective that they could bring to it.
Thank you.
And the only thing I would just add really quickly is the shift in the language away from representing DAC members representing the diversity of the community we serve, and we've changed that language to reflect the interests of historically underrepresented and disproportionately impacted students of the community we serve. And I'm really pleased with that change in language.
So thank you. I think that's a great summary. That's really helpful. I guess I want to see if there's a motion from either Vice President Watson or Director Shuey. So we're happy to take a motion.
Well, I'll move that we pass, and then I have to find the policy number, so that's why it's not smooth. I move that we pass policy 3241 as presented here.
Seconded.
Great. So all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, there's 4 ayes, and hearing no votes against, the motion passes, and the revised version of policy 3241 is now passed. And one just point of clarification that I think Director Chu had wanted to make, which may have been made by email, was just that in our prior kind of suspension of this policy, it was only for the correction of that piece of it, we were not and had never suspended the entire policy. Moreover, we did go forward, as others know, the parent rep who was proposed by the PTSA, who has already been serving, has been fantastic, and we're grateful for her participation. And our DAC representative is actually now Director Joyce Shuey, and we had agreed previously that all 4 of the rest of us will serve as alternates for the DAC Disciplinary Advisory Committee as needed and when needed. So with that, let's move to item 7.2. There's 2 items to consider tonight, and I'll just give a little bit of context for each. One is the draft agenda for next meeting. It's basically as it was posted earlier this week, not changed. You also see the proposal for our board development. So I'm happy to talk through it, but the board development proposal is essentially as it was when we discussed it about 2 weeks ago. The key thing is that when we had discussed it before, I had not and have since tried to map priorities to what is essentially proposed. So we discussed already, so I won't plow this, but in essence, this is mapped out only for 6 months, because I think as we get to know each other and things start to change, we should together think about ideas for how we map out the next 6 months. The priority I've indicated really mapped to superintendent search, what I called instruction in the era of COVID, or instruction during COVID, because there are things that are very germane to where we are right now. And then the strategic plan development. I call it strategic plan development, current and working towards our next one, but within it, I think some of the things that Director Chu brought up are quite relevant. They have to do with monitoring, meaning how do you create a strategic plan when our current one expires in 2023? So our current one goes through next year, but we have a set of annual plan goals that will actually essentially come to resolution by the end of this year. How do you even look at those if you don't understand metrics or how to monitor? That's part of what we try to layer in here. So you'll see in some of the sessions, we try to not put too much extra sessions to try to pull forward into our regular set time when we're going to be here anyway, what we can learn from the district. So you'll see March 17th, we have a regular board meeting, but we're really focused on early learning. We know we're going to get those updates, and then we think, okay, if we're going to learn about those early learning, for example, can we then focus on how the district uses, metrics of how those metrics are developed and how are they used to measure student progress. Some of that came up when we did that assessment discussion. I think we heard that and we thought, I'd like to hear more about how they figure out what metrics to use. And then our second session in that same study workshop is what goal to metrics show and what they suggest for future planning. And those metrics are around academic success, growth in literature and math, proficiency in literature and math, and graduation success. So the reason we're doing this is we're sort of saying, you're going to present stuff to us anyway, but the order in which we'd like it is to map so that we front load and we focus on things that we think are going to be important to us as we figure out what our priorities are going to be for the next strategic plan, but particularly if we root ourselves in the notion that we probably need to get our RFP out for our superintendent search, if we want to do it early and not on the later side, we want to be anchoring that in a March, April timeframe. And so we're trying to pull forward a lot of the tools we'll need, pull them forward. So that is what you see here. My proposal or my motion is that you consider that we consider passing this today with the understanding that if board members have a specific request to add something or swap something, that we all be open to modifying it as long as it doesn't, it's going to be very hard to do that if it's something that's going to happen, within a month, because the challenge with waiting on this is the district has been asked to do things and prepare things for us. And the longer I wait to get them to know if this is official or not official, the more they're kind of waiting in suspense. So for that reason, I'd ask you to consider passing this. Yes, Director Harris.
I'm okay with this, with the caveat of that something that was brought to my attention earlier this week. I believe this discussion of instruction policy around instructional framework was discussed and worked on by staff members. And I believe even it was drafted, but last time it was brought up was back in May.
Are you talking about the thing that was brought by Paul Sutton in front of SIFE?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm actually supposed to be talking to him tomorrow. I think I believe that's policy, and it was considered, I believe, with SIFE and not planned for action on their committee yet, but I want to hear, so I'm not quite sure. I'm supposed to talk to him tomorrow. Is that a policy question, or is it a different request?
It's a different request.
Okay.
And I guess my understanding is there isn't a policy on it yet. There's a discussion around creating a policy, and there was a lot of work put on around it. And based upon my understanding, it's actually pretty close, and it just needs to be brought to the board. I do think it is something that we should consider looking at it or make time framed in, because I think it will help us aid in finding the superintendent.
Okay, I want to ask, I think Executive Director Harrison was about to jump in, maybe, or am I pointing to somebody behind you? Sorry, I didn't know if you had something you were about to join in on that topic. Okay, so I would love to be able to talk to you about how we should fit that in. If you think it's under the category, let's say, of equity, if you believe it's more instructional, sort of like future instruction, but I think it's a great call out, and perhaps what we can do is we can raise it in our discussion topic next time, but I'm also happy to talk to you one-to-one. I will just acknowledge I'm supposed to talk to Paul Sutton tomorrow, and I'm hoping to learn more. Okay. So I'm fine with that, that caveat and any others for ideas that will come up. So with that, is there a second to the motion to pass our board proposal for development for the first 6 months of this year?
Yes. Second.
Okay. So at this time, I would ask us to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. All right. I think that's 4. I hear no nays, so the motion passes. I do also want to just acknowledge and just a flag for the superintendent. I recall at the meeting last time, Director Aris had asked if we could have either an update or discussion on communications. And I think I'm not asking for a report, but I wonder if Superintendent Jarvis, if we have any time at the end of today, could we maybe just learn a little bit about, I know for me, what comes to mind is something you've told me about is just the COVID dashboard and some improvements and changes that have been made. If we have any time at the end of today after we get through the presentations and discussion. If you're able to even give any update, I think that would be well received. And I think we didn't have time in our discussion today, and I don't think we were able to get to it in the Q&A on Tuesday, but I want to make sure I do honor that request that came. Okay, yeah, we won't keep you here till midnight. Okay, so, all right, with that then, I think we have our really well-awaited department updates. We are only 45 minutes late, so we feel good about how we're doing. Okay, so item 9.1 is special education, and I will leave it to the superintendent.
And we're going to try to help you on that, the timing, because I think what we're going to try to do is about 10 to 15 minutes of presentation, allow 5 to 10 minutes, whatever you need for questions. And I want to centralize it as I offer my comments and turn it over to others. One of the hardest things to do in education is to literally change the model of delivery. And I guess I have lived long enough to be in an era when there were big special schools. Children with disabilities were put in a special school or a special place, even to the point of living there. That morphed into moving programs into buildings, but still the concept, if you want to stereotype it, was the portable outback would be the special education place. Then special education, as it grew, got more and more departmentalized within programs for different disabilities and different groups. But I say all of that in preparation for something that you have been working on in this district for several years now, and that is equity and disproportionality in special education. And in this report, I want to read one sentence that's included in the policy 0130. The district recognizes that students with disabilities can be marginalized and often separated from their peer community. We also recognize that these students face additional barriers when they come from other marginalized groups, particularly students of color. The district is committed to addressing inequities and biases towards students and families whose voice or access have been marginalized in conjunction with their disabilities, committed to minimizing situations that separate students from their peers in the peer learning environment. Tonight, that's the slice that we presented to you in the report last Friday, and we didn't get too far in talking about that piece of it on Tuesday. But I would present it as tremendously important. You now have inclusion practices and programs in every school in the Bellevue School District. And that is a remarkable achievement. It is part of your strategic plan. It is part of your accountability. It is part of your equity goals. And this report attempts to share with you, in essence, how it was done, why it was done, and where we are, and to recognize that we have a long way to go. We will not have eliminated disproportionality yet, but to have students in a place, and I guess the way I would say it is, instead of a school system and a public school system that says those kids must be dealt with by somebody else because that's not my job, and move it back to every principal, every administrator, every teacher, every program in the district is part of inclusion. And we do have students who have disabilities or special needs, and they are part of how we do that business. So I'm sorry to even take that long, but I think I just needed to say that as the significance. Then I'm going to turn to Heather Evelyn and Melanie McGee again and ask them to just briefly highlight, and then we're going to open it to questions, know where you really would like to go and what we can answer about this. So Heather, would you take the lead on that? Well, I do apologize. Kristen Callisto would love to be here with us tonight, and I think she'd be swelling with pride over this report. She's on leave and not able to be with us. So thank you, Heather, for filling in while you have nothing to do with keeping the schools open in COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jarvis. No, I'm honored to talk about special education every time I get to. for those of you who might be new to the board, you may not know, but I come to special education from personal history. So the things that are said and the things that are done in our special education programs are what I would want done for my own family members in terms of that. And so I take the responsibility that the district has for recovery services very seriously in right now dealing with recovery services for my nephew who is in another school district. But I would say that recovery services in and of itself is a COVID related term. And really is there is no such thing as recovery services if there were no such thing as COVID. And so it really does belong in that kind of arena of COVID, like what we're doing in the era of COVID with instruction. And that's not to downplay that it's not urgent and important to families, it certainly is. But at the same time, keeping to our mission of including all students in general education settings in meaningful ways still remains a core focus. And it was really difficult last year in the pandemic to have kids be so isolated, to be isolated at home, and then to have only students with disabilities coming back into general education settings earlier, really, I think, took a step back in our progress that we had made towards inclusion. And so having this opportunity to talk with you all about how we're reinstating that vision and doubling back down on that as a way of addressing both academic, social, emotional needs of students is just really important. So I think Kristen would say something similar if she were here right now. I'm sorry if that missed the mark, but that's the intent of the presentation today, is to talk about, especially now coming off a pandemic, it could easily be said that our kids with disabilities are more impacted and therefore need even more specialized opportunities that could even pull them further out and make us go further back in time, as Dr. Jarvis described, about services for students with disabilities. And so I want to just be sure that everyone in this room knows, as we give this presentation today, it is because we believe that that is the right thing to do for students academically, for their mental health, for their social emotional well-being, and just generally to be a person in society. So I'll just add that as a general caveat to start. And so the purpose really of this was to talk with you all about where we're at with inclusionary practices in the district and how we're doubling back down on that coming off of the pandemic, where we really missed opportunities to be as inclusive as we like to. There's a chart here about who's who. I will skip that in the effort of time and go over some of our vision. So we do really believe that in a strength-based approach. And looking at what it is what gifts and talents everybody brings, and how do we leverage those for progress. And I think especially now, as we're coming out of these impacts, being able to identify where every student is, what is their best way of learning, and identifying that for their experiences is really important. And we want them to really feel like members of their general education setting. From those who are minimally impacted to those who are more significantly impacted, and make sure that they're getting access to general education settings. We obviously want them to learn. I think that's why we're all here, is for student learning. And so looking at what those supports and assists look like. And one of the things that we do have with our inclusion process is we do have a membership and participation rubric that identifies the quality of experience that students have in an inclusive setting. So it's more than just the time that students spend, although that is an indicator that the state looks at as quantity of time or percentage of time in a general education setting. We take that even farther in this district. We take that even further, thank you, in the district, to use a membership and participation rubric that comes out of SWIFT, which is a Technical Assistance Center for Special Education, to identify the quality of experience that students have to ensure that they are learning and thriving in the classroom, not just spending time in a general education setting. I'll skip over our superintendent, state superintendent. You may have seen this data before. Washington ranks pretty low in terms of inclusion for students with disabilities in special education. And even more so here in Bellevue, we've been identified, as you heard earlier, the one area for improvement for us is in this area of equity. Students who are Black, students who identify as Hispanic are disproportionately represented in special education in our district and are spending more time in exclusive settings, so specialized programs, than their white Asian counterparts. And therefore, focusing on inclusion is and reducing that gap, increasing everyone's time, as the data shows, we're pretty far behind in Washington for serving kids in gen ed settings, but also improving that for particularly those who are more disadvantaged is another reason for us to be focused on this. So ultimately, we do believe that all students are competent and have the potential. And we want to nurture that and support them to learn, thrive, and be members of their community. All students benefit from diverse and inclusive communities. It's not just the students with disabilities who benefit from that, but in the natural community, all types of people show up in the community. And so we all benefit from learning from one another and experiencing those different individuals. We believe that all students can participate alongside each other and in meaningful ways. That the support might look different, the strategy might look different, but every student can participate in a meaningful way in the general education setting, and that all students should be seen and treated as individuals. And I would just say I'm really proud of our staff. I think they've embraced that, taken that on, and are problem solvers. And they, it's challenging to do something that hasn't been done, and especially when you haven't done it in a while. But I think our staff has taken that on as a personal responsibility, from our administrators in our buildings to our paraeducators. And the reason you hear about things like we need more time for planning is because of that commitment to our students and problem solving around it. And so there are definitely things we can do to improve the overall process, but our people are just, I would say, fully committed in doing just, working their socks off to make sure students are making progress on their academic goals, their social emotional goals, and being able to participate fully in their school environments. So Dr. Jarvis talked about your policy. It supports us as well in identifying why we would continue to work on inclusion for students with disabilities. I'll kind of skip over these pieces right here. So 3 pieces we're focusing on right now, I would say, with respect to this, some areas we've identified for growth with respect to inclusionary practices is one is the reinforcement of technical skills. And there's a few different items on this. One is ensuring that our academic goals are aligned with Washington state standards, so that we have high rigorous expectations for students, so that those are nesting. They may not be the same grade level expectation, but that they're nested as a trajectory toward the academic learning requirements for students, and also how we develop those IEPs with families so that they are able to comprehend and understand what's in them, and that they're clear, so that we spend less time with our counsel, Ms. McMenemy here. Also, strengthening our inclusionary practices. What exactly does that look like? And we'll talk a little bit about that on a couple of slides. And then ultimately, with the effort of thinking that our theory of action, if you will, is spending more time in a general education setting, working towards high standards, will help to reduce our disproportionate outcomes that we have for students.
Well, I'm going to jump in at that point. We could obviously take 60 minutes or more, and we could wander in the wilderness, but I think we wanted to make sure we saved a few minutes for you, so I'll hand it back to you, Madam President, and we'll try to answer any questions.
Sure, I'm going to go ahead and take the liberty of calling on Director Aris, only because, I know that she's pretty steep and deep in special education, and I thought it might make sense to start with her. So if you have any comments or questions, I'd invite them. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. First of all, I want to again reiterate that we appreciate all the effort and energy and the heart the staff behind special education department puts in. I know it's a lot of work, and I know the heart and love people, people put in to support our students. That said, the inclusionary practice and the piloting, is there a quick question on that? Do we have a goal set? I mean, especially we love goals and objectives.
Yeah.
Is there a goal set to make sure that we're increasing that meaningful and defining meaningful really well so that we're really working towards that benchmark?
We do. So I want to clarify first the inclusionary practices pilot language. That's actually what the state calls the training that they're providing. So that IPP is not a pilot, Bellevue pilot, it's an OSPI pilot.
Thank you.
So I want to be clear that it's not we're trying a new pilot of something, but rather we've joined into training that has kind of a whole comprehensive approach. I can send you the link to the OSPI website, but it goes from training to staff to how we evaluate the program that we have, both from evaluating staff performance to all the way to things like students, experience in the classroom, like I talked about before. And we have set measurable goals. So we, pre-COVID, if you'd been here for a presentation for that, we did walkthroughs and we used the membership and participation rubric 3 times a year and walked through the classrooms. And so we've been continuing that this fall. We're on a pause at the moment of walking through additional classrooms, but walking through classrooms, identifying where that school or that particular classroom experience is and setting a goal for improvement in that particular experience. How we've tracked that at the district level then is to extrapolate that up to a school level. So instead of reporting at the individual classroom level out at the district level, rather we'd say at Stevenson Elementary, for example, here's where they started on the, here's how many qualities they were showing on the membership and participation rubric then. Here was their goal for mid-year. Here's their goal for the end of the year. How are they progressing on these individual indicators? So yes, we do.
Do you have a timeline set for that, the goal that you're trying to meet, and what does that look like?
Yeah, and it varies by school based around that initial kind of, assessment of where they are. And I would say, this probably won't come as a surprise, but holding on to special education staff, it remains a challenge for the district. And so it is a little bit different each year. You might come up with a really good thing in place, and then you might be retraining staff each year. So I would say retention of special education staff and identifying ways to, support them in in the work that they're doing would be something for us to be continuing to think about because we do, lose a little bit of ground on where that particular classroom culture was or that school culture was when we have staff turnover.
And one final question. You mentioned that students of color are disproportionately represented in special education. What are you doing to remedy that?
So another good question, and that's not something we talked about today, but there's another, so because we've been identified as needing improvement in that one particular area, we're required to hold a set aside of our federal grant money for coordinated early intervening services. Because essentially, as you might recognize, once a student's been identified for special education services, it's a little bit late to try to correct the over-identification part. We can improve the services. So that means that we've been focusing on what we're doing pre-referral. So working with our psychologists, working with our ELL department on that evaluation process. What are the pre-referral interventions that we have in place? How are we documenting that system? So part of our grant, and this could be probably its own coordinated early intervening services, could probably be its own presentation, but essentially we have a project and a plan for that identifies how do we capture that before the referral happens.
So, but the overrepresentation and the lack of access to inclusion, are we putting extra effort to make sure those students who are overrepresented, the students of color who are overrepresented, to put them back into the general ed classroom with a greater support?
Correct. Yes, and we've shared data in the past, but we've made great gains in that area in terms of improving that particular metric of improving access to general education for all students while also closing the gap for students of color.
Thank you.
It's harder to measure that. It's harder to give you trajectory because last year we didn't have the data. So I can't really give you an update on where we're at yet this year.
But you'll be collecting data this year too.
That's correct.
And reporting back to us with that.
That's correct. Our plan would be to go back to our pre-COVID measurements for inclusion where we're looking at the membership and participation rubric, we're looking at the participation in the general education setting, et cetera. Our data is always 1 year behind. So you'll see if you were looking at like our disproportionate, it was for the 2021 school year. So right now it's particularly challenging because of last year to be analyzing the data in the same process as we were before. That doesn't mean we're not doing it. We are continuing to do it. It just doesn't look the same.
And sorry, I know I said that was my last question, but I do have one more. You stated that we have hard time retaining our special ed teachers, and I understand that it's hard across all over. Do we have a harder time, I guess disproportionately harder time retaining special ed teachers here?
Not here compared to anywhere else.
Okay.
No.
Is there
disproportionate time, harder time keeping them in a special ed role in our district? They often want to move into a general education position in our district. So we're retaining those staff, just not in their special education position.
Are we looking at any way to help them want to stay?
Always. Absolutely. Always. We're always talking with them about, what would improve. That work environment for them. Yes. And HR is with us on that one too. And BEA, all of us are working together on how we can make that how we can retain our great special education staff.
Right. Great. Thank you very much.
I don't know if there's not specific or I would say urgent questions. I'm going to make a proposal that we consider shifting to the levy. And the main reason is because two things. First, I know Melissa DeVita has a hard stop that I was warned about, and I thought surely we wouldn't even get close to running against that, but I think we might. But also because I think there's a real parallel in seemingly disparate topics like special education and the levy, but there's quite a bit of relevance there. So I wonder if it's okay with board directors. Oh, okay, Vice President Watson.
Just let me say thank you to Heather, because, like we were saying, sometimes we're focusing too much on the negative, but I just want to say inclusion goes back to what I used to call Dr. Mill's favorite pie chart ages ago before this annual plan. And I'm just really encouraged that you are working so hard on it. And I remember going on a school visit to an inclusionary classroom and the teachers, coming to a meeting and voicing concerns that they didn't feel like they were fully prepared, but it seems like you're addressing that. And I just want to, acknowledge this work on inclusion. And this is what a lot of special needs advocates have been wanting. Obviously, the devil's in the details. There's more things to be worked out, but I wanted to say thank you for working on it. That's all.
Thank you. Okay, so I realized that Melanie was on tap to talk also, but if it's not upsetting to you, I think I will remove you from that opportunity and ask Deputy Superintendent DeVita to give us, I think, maybe you can give us either a high level or you can start with special education, because I don't think people realize literally how much of our levy helps bridge the gap between what we give to our students as we should, but what we don't get the funds from the state for and what we actually give. So maybe you can start there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'll talk a little bit about why the levy is so important to us, and then I want to talk a little bit about what's been going on with our campaign, where we are with that, and what you can continue to see as we get closer to the actual voting election day of February 8th. So, we have 2 levies on our ballot. The ballots actually dropped yesterday, so they may even be in your mailbox when you get home this evening. The first is our education program and operations levy, and then the second is our capital and tech levy. The education programs and operation levy, well, first of all, let me say that levies are what make Bellevue School District, Bellevue School District. The state funds basic education, and their definition of basic education is 6 periods per day. They underfund many programs, including special education, and I'll talk about by how much in 1 second. They underfund supporting student well-being, which we heard a significant amount about this evening as well. And they don't support the arts, especially at elementary level, and they do not support after-school activities and athletics, which we know are some of the main reasons why kids stay engaged in school, because those are the topics of interest to them. In particular, they fund 6 periods a day. And if you think about that for high schoolers, that's 24 credits. There is no room in that schedule for a student to have any struggles or issues or problems over those 4 years of high school. They would have to go to summer school in order to graduate them within those 4 years. We offer tutorial after school to keep kids performing, and it enables us to offer our students access to AP classes, because that is the way we give them the supports they need in order to engage in all of those advanced placement classes as they move through high school. It also gives us time so that kids can actually take world languages and band or orchestra or music at the same time in our high schools. If they only had 6 periods a day, they could not do that for 4 years because of the requirement for additional classes that they have to take to graduate and that type of thing. So really, it is what allows our high schools to be Bellevue high schools and to support our kids. In the area of special education, after you take out safety net, which is their reimbursement from the state, over $20 million, close to $25 million of our levy goes straight to special education. That is money that we do not get from the state and we do not get from the federal government. And so our programs would change significantly if we did not get those funds. So our education program and operations levy really allow our Bellevue schools to be our Bellevue schools, and it allows us to meet the needs of our kids. We supplement athletics. I know we have a pay-to-play kind of policy here where kids pay about $100 for each season of sport. We waive that for a number of students who need the financial support, but it doesn't even come close to covering the cost of our coaches and other things. So multiple millions of dollars go into that. It goes into after-school activities like robotics and other things that kids are interested in, and it goes into orchestra, band, music, and art at our elementary schools. We know that it's important for students to have a well-rounded education, to be exposed to those things early on in their education. And so we would not be able to fund those teachers without our education operations levy. The second levy that is on the ballot is our capital and tech levy, and that is just as important for kids. It is what we use for our laptops and tablets for all of our students. And I know that one of the discussions floating out there is, hey, your kids already have these. Why do you still need this? Well, they don't last forever. And so our students get them, they'll get a laptop in elementary school, they'll get a new laptop when they enter 6th grade, they'll get another laptop when they enter 9th grade. But by the time a student uses a laptop on a daily basis for 3 to 4 years, that laptop is pretty much done, as you can imagine. So not only does the technology advance, but also think about it going back and forth in a kid's backpack on a daily basis. So we need to replenish these laptops for our students. It also helps us fund all of the learning software that kids use. Kids use learning software these days. Unlike when I was in school or you were in school, the learning software enables them to move forward at their own pace, and it also supplements what they learn in the classroom with their teachers. So it's another way for them to connect. And it allows us to have our integrated digital curriculum. So it's all of those things that really enhance our teaching and learning environment in our classrooms. In addition, it does support the teachers with the technology in the classrooms. It also allows us to maintain our buildings, update our buildings for safety measures, and it supports the overall infrastructure of the district. So our capital and tech levy also enables our students to learn on a day-to-day basis and truly does support them in that environment.
So can I just intervene for a second? So if I can, I'm just going to come with sort of some mythbuster points as well as maybe just extrapolating from what you said. So if we take the operations
The education programs?
Yeah, no, the
Capital tech?
capital and tech levy, if we didn't have that, we wouldn't retrofitting our buildings to meet ventilation standards. Where would that money have come from?
So we would not be able to retrofit our older buildings. Our newer buildings do have updated ventilation systems as it is, but we would not be able to.
So for COVID, for
retrofit.
example, we were able to pull from that money because there's rules around where we can pull, which is another thing we hear, but didn't you just pass a bond? So I would love it if you could help us, like, just give examples, like money for bonds is for buildings, which you've said many times, but our bond is separate. So if we did not have this levy, we would not, the capital and tech levy, we would not be able to do things like update our buildings to make sure ventilation is good, make sure for an older building it had the same safety measures that we have for a brand new building.
Correct.
Is that a correct?
That is a correct statement.
Okay.
So our capital and tech levy, so a perfect example is we've updated the entrances to many of our older schools so that when somebody comes to the school building, they're forced to go through the office when they enter. That was not a standard practice back when we started rebuilding our buildings. And it's important that we have that in place for the safety and security of our students. So one of the buildings that we updated recently with these funds is Bellevue High School. So Bellevue High School, originally you could walk into the front door of that building, bypass the office and go to wherever. Now you have to walk in, it forces you to go through the office to get your name tag, etc., before you can enter the rest of the building. So it's really important that those standards are there. Another is we put up in front of the buildings, the things that keep cars from running into them. It's kind of like the target balls, right? Those things are important because in today's world, you just want to make sure that there's separation and that your buildings are safe for all your students. So we've added those at many of our schools as well. So those are things that were not in place when we originally rebuilt our buildings. So safety is a big thing. Updating our ventilation systems, carpeting, painting, all of those things are done with these funds. We do not get capital funds from the state for that.
Yeah, and what I'm hearing from you is there's things you can anticipate. So you already know as a building depreciates, you're going to probably need to paint it, change the carpet. But then there's things you probably didn't anticipate, like COVID, or maybe as terrorist or other or shooting threats come up, we want to quickly respond. If you didn't have this levy money from years past, you wouldn't be able to be responsive. And what you're saying is the state's not going to give you the money. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, so a question, I think, or something to address, because I think you hear this a lot. We often will hear, but we're in Bellevue, and that must mean that I'm paying higher taxes, so therefore we get more money from the state. So if you could address that, but the other pieces, the whole notion that this is a renewal is something that I don't think people are fully understanding, that this is not something additional, it's not additive. It is to renew what you already have. So if these levies fail, every student will lose something. It's not that they won't gain something, it's they will lose something they already have.
Right. So what's different in the state of Washington is our levies expire every 4 years. In other states, once a levy is voted in, they're often called other things like an override levy. But once a local levy is voted in, it is there forever. And so then anytime you vote in something else, it is additive. In the state of Washington, they do expire. These levies account for 20% of our general fund spending year over year. So if these are not approved, then we literally have to find 20% because that funding will go away effective in 2023 tax year. So going into next year, the 22-23 school year, we would lose half of our local revenue, and then the subsequent year, all of it would be gone unless we went back and asked voters again. If they don't pass right now, we would have to go back out and ask again, or we'd have to start making those cuts before we entered the 22-23 school year. The other thing you asked is about bonds, right? So bonds are for building new buildings. So when we put a bond on, what we're really asking our voters for is if we can take on debt up to a certain amount, that they are guaranteeing that they will repay us through property taxes. So what it's almost like a mortgage for our new buildings, right? So bond money is used to build new structures. So Puesta del Sol right now is in the middle of being constructed. Big Picture is next. Newport High School needs some expansion and some other things. We all know how crowded Newport High School is. So all of that is going to be handled by the bond that the voters approved 2 years ago. These levies are for our day-to-day operations, and they're limited too. Our education programs and operations levy, we are limited to just over $2,600 per student in terms of how much we can collect on an annual basis. And that's about a little over $50 million a year right now. Our capital and tech levy, we're limited on what we can use it for. We cannot use it for teachers' salaries. We cannot, so we're very limited. It has to be used for capital or technology, capital being large maintenance projects or technology. So maintaining our fields as well is another big piece of this. You know, just because we have turf fields, those don't last forever. They have to be maintained and updated and all of that. So there's a lot of things that we do on a regular basis that these funds are used for.
So I ask if any board directors have questions. If they do, I'd like to invite them. If not, I've got many more I can ask, but I want to make sure I create space for, why don't I talk to those who are joining us virtually tonight. Why don't I start with Director Shuey, if she has any questions, or Vice President Watson. Do you have anything specifically or generally you'd like to ask of Deputy Superintendent DeVita?
No questions. Just wanted to commend you on, I saw your presentation, heard it last night as well, and you are an excellent advocate. So thank you for all that excellent information and presentation.
Thank you.
Vice President Watson, do you have anything you would like to ask or address?
No, I'm fortunate to have been able to hear Melissa about this on many occasions. So if you have some questions, that'd be great, because what I'm thinking right now are, what are the questions do we want people to hear the answers to?
Sure. Let me first ask Director Aris if she has anything.
Honestly, you've asked all the questions I could think of myself, in the same light of what Carolyn was saying regarding making sure that those who are not here could hear to help them make those decisions to support the schools.
I'd like to talk a little bit about our tax rates here, because you asked that question.
I would love that. The tax rates, as well as just, I think what I would say, the prevailing myth, because I think something good has happened in the sense of equity, in that our state has said basically where you live, your zip code should not be the predictor of the quality of your education. And that happened after the McCleary decision. I think what people don't realize, therefore, is what they pay into the state is less than what we get back. That would all be fine if the state would actually then fund. They would define basic education in the robust way that it should be defined. But I think what counts as basic education is actually not meeting the mark. And special education is a perfect example.
Right.
So we have many unfunded mandates, and we actually use our levy to close the gap. And I think that's where you're saying Bellevue would not be Bellevue if we didn't have our levy.
Right. So nurses is always a great example. They fund 4 nurses for our 28 schools. We fund an additional 20 nurses. And how important have those been during our pandemic? They also don't fund this mental health supports. You know, as stated earlier, we are using our ESSER dollars for that. And it is having a big impact on our students as well. Your property taxes go to a lot of different places. as far as school property taxes go, $3.09 per $1,000 of your assessed value goes to the state right now. That money then is all pooled together, and then individual school districts get it back via the formula that the state has to fund districts. And they use a prototypical school model, which basically says for every 400 student elementary school, you get one principal, you get so many nurses, you get so many counselors, you get so many teachers, and that's how they determine how much you get back. We do not get back. Basically, the west side of the state puts more money into that pool than we get back. And it is really important from an equity perspective that all students are educated within our state. So that's very important. We then have our local levies that we use to supplement what we get from the state to support education. And that's why I said these levies make Bellevue, Bellevue. And it's what allows us to do some of the things to meet the needs of what our community asks for. So for example, the arts in elementary school, every 5th grader being able to learn an instrument is huge for us. And those are things that our community loves seeing us being able to do. And that's what your levy funds. Our local taxes, there's 3 different taxes that you pay. One is your EP&O, Education Programs and Operations levy, that's on the ballot and is expiring. One is your Capital and Tech levy that is also on the ballot. The third is the Debt Service Fund, which pays back our bonds, which is the principal and interest that we owe on those bonds. Those total $2.60 for every $1,000 of your home value. We ask taxpayers if we can collect a certain amount of money. We don't levy a rate. So the state's $3.09, that's what they levy. So as your assessed value goes up, you pay more because you're always paying $3.09 per 1,000 right now. The state sets that rate. We ask you for an amount. Can we collect this much money? As the assessed value on our community goes up, the tax rate will drop because the amount doesn't change. So for your individual home, if it goes up at the same rate as the community, you will be paying the same amount of dollars. Okay? If your home value goes up less than the community, you'll be paying less dollars. If it goes up faster, then you'll be paying more. But in this way, you know that new construction is paying their fair share, right? So new construction goes into that higher assessed value as well. So that the $2.60, you know, you wonder how does that compare to other districts in our area? And it's pretty low. Seattle is lower, Mercer Island is lower, Lake Washington we're about even with. Issaquah's rate is $3.63 per 1,000. The highest in King County is Auburn with $5.20 per 1,000. So they're literally paying double in Auburn what we're paying here. Now, some people will say, well, our home values are higher. Yeah, but I don't think they're half. I don't think Auburn's home values are half of what ours are. So we in Bellevue are considered a property-rich district. And the reason why our rates are so low is because we have people like Microsoft. We have the Bellevue Collection. We have Amazon moving in. So when Amazon moves in and those open up, our rates will drop because of that addition to our assessed value in our community. So we are very fortunate to have a property-rich district.
Okay, so I'm going to go through some points and maybe you can tell me if I'm right or please correct me. Okay. So if someone says, I don't want to pay more than I already pay, the answer is this levy does not mean you'll be paying more. You'll be paying the same, possibly less, but the same.
Yes.
If they say what will change, we would say if the levies are not passed, your kids and your community will lose something.
Correct.
Is that fair? Okay, so then if we talk about health and they say, well, how does the levy make a difference? Whether you're a community member who has kids in the district or not, having children and teachers in schools that are supported by nurses and counselors is important. And in our case, if we didn't have the levy, we would have 4 nurses for 20 1,000 students almost, rather than the 24. We would have many fewer counselors at a time when we have a mental health crisis. During COVID, we would not have been able to retrofit our buildings for ventilation. I don't think we'd be able to pay for hand sanitizer and masks and things like that. We probably got some of that from external dollars, but I think we were able to use some of our levy funds.
I'm so sorry. I am speaking at Somerset tonight, and the woman who is running it is now calling me. So obviously their agenda is moving quicker than they anticipated.
So I'm going to let you go. And
Okay.
On our side,
Okay.
I think I'm pretty confident being able to finish a few final points, and then we will move on to a topic of COVID, which is perfectly timed. So thank you. I believe based on what you said before, thank you, Deputy Superintendent DeVita. We really appreciate it. Based on safety, I think essentially a lot of the quality of what we're able to deliver is impacted by our levy, but notably, I just want to talk about safety, earthquake preparedness, and the changes we make to our building, as well as protecting against intruders. That is all supported through our capital and tech levy. Creators of our future world, which is part of our mission and our vision, art, music, technology, robotics, rocketry, those are all things that are supported by our levy. And graduation success, I think that's something that we see as a commitment to our district across all backgrounds, and it's an equity issue. And if you didn't have 7 periods, basically, I think what Deputy Superintendent DeVita is saying is you wouldn't have as many people graduating. And frankly, I think you increase stress on students when the path to success is so narrow that they can't make a single mistake. So anyway, I think that lays out the facts, and I think our community hopefully is listening and will take the right action. So with that, I think Superintendent Jarvis, can you give us some update on the communication side around COVID? Because I think Director Aris and others I know have some questions.
We'll try to do it quickly. Again, I'm going to invite Heather Edlin to join us, because even as we're sitting here, we're exchanging certain emails of when the test kits are going to be coming in and when they're going to be available and what type of test kits and so forth. So let me start right there. In a sense, one of the changes that you're seeing is that both the federal and the state tests are starting to become available. The ESD sent trucks down to Vancouver, Washington over the weekend to pick up tests to bring back for us in Bellevue and other school districts. So you're seeing the advent maybe of the epitome of the test, the highest apex, because what's happening right now is the latest variant has really swept through the community, and it really in some ways took all the contact tracing and the normal testing duration and put us 3 days behind, which didn't make then any sense. So it changed, it literally obviated it and made archaic our own dashboard as well as our process. So I start with that because that's the biggest way. The second thing that I would say before I invite Heather in to give you actual information is that according to the experts, according to what we're seeing, and we'll talk a couple numbers here in a minute, we are right at that world of believing that we're starting to see the change in the west side and in this district and in our schools. There are various predictions on when the actual case count will start to drop, and if it is dropping now, with a tail of hospitals and unfortunately death trailing behind the case count of that the hospitals may yet be 2 weeks behind us in what we have seen the last 2 weeks in caseload. So the short version is, I don't know that I've ever seen a school district work this hard and everybody working to keep the schools open and make it work. This staff has been meeting virtually at 7 a.m. And by that time, there's already been people up for quite some time comparing every single day, where do we need substitutes, where do we have unfilled positions, who's going to teach the 4th grade and who's going to teach middle schoolers. I'd love to have seen some of those discussions, because I can picture who was willing to go into the middle school and who said not me. But the reality is we have been able to keep our schools open. The two issues that I would point, and I think you know this well, but the one issue is, can you keep children and staff safe in terms of operating the school? The answer is pretty much unconditional there. We probably have the safest places in any community in the schools. We've been able to do that. They're not super spreader places. The second issue, though, that has confronted us in this last 2 weeks is, can we maintain a staff that can keep the schools open? And that staff, if they're absent from virtual or they're absent from in-person. It's not a matter of having the staff to run virtually if we can't run in person. That was more a matter of closing down if we couldn't. I have to say to our staff, as I look out here and know what they have done, they have just done some absolute, almost miracle level work to make sure that the kids had places to go and the schools were open and the buses were running. And I say that from the bottom of my heart. So Heather, do you have any data you can share with people on why I'm being a little optimistic?
Sure, I'm happy to share some data with the team. So I have been tracking our data since the beginning of, since January 4th, I guess, since we returned during the COVID surge. And the data I'll share with you has to do with the testing we're doing internally. So we do offer testing here in the district, both rapid antigen and PCR testing. The data I'm going to share is about our PCR testing. We are focusing on testing symptomatic individuals, so that gives you an idea of it's not like we're testing just everyone randomly with PCR tests, but rather a focus on symptomatic individuals. And so we've given, I would say as of today, I pulled it before this meeting, we've processed 1,317 pooled tests. 245 have come back as needing follow-up, which is 19%. That's stayed about the same each week. It was 18% the first week, or 13% the first week, and then it's been 18 the past 2. We've been back 3 weeks. And then with respect to our individual tests, we're up to now this week we processed, so this week we processed 1,800 so far this week. Of those, 421 have come back positive with a 23%. That's remained also steady for us in our district since we've returned. And again, that's of symptomatic individuals primarily. There are some asymptomatic for various test to stay protocols, things of that nature. So we're staying fairly steady, and if anything, seeing a decline from our first week back in terms of the testing data that we have here in our district.
What about absences by teachers as well as students? What does the trend data show if you have it? And if you don't, we will go to something else.
I haven't been looking at that. Hasn't been my area. I don't know if anyone on the team, I think Patty is, you might be able to look at staff absences. Patty, Jeff and Sharon have been working on the staffing pieces.
So 2 important components that we're monitoring and trends. The first one is on daily certified absence. These are all teachers and certified employees covered under the BEA contract. And we are running roughly 25% above normal rates of absence. What that means in real numbers is if we have 100 teachers out on a given day, that's a good day. If we have more than 200 teachers out, we are scrambling for coverage. The trend this week has been cautiously optimistic and favorable in that our numbers have been running between 140 and 175 And then we're monitoring the number of unfilled classrooms where we have to deploy emergency support on a daily basis, which means many of the people in the room and then district directors and other certified staff to fill at schools where we absolutely need to provide the extra help. And that number, when we get on a day where we are fewer than 40, then we're starting to really see that we might be tapering off. Tomorrow will be a clear indicator. Fridays are our highest absence day. And we were running roughly 150 anticipating for tomorrow. I really won't know the answer until we get here tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. But the 24-hour period the day before is really where you have the difficult absences to fill. And those people are almost always really sick.
Okay, so a question I think Director Eris and I think Director Shuey had raised, but I could be wrong in interpreting what I think they wanted us to focus on, but part of it was just how we're communicating to our district for them to be able to make choices for themselves. So I know there was some question and maybe remedy around the dashboard. I just wondered if that's something somebody could address.
You want the new dashboard?
Yeah, I can speak some to the dashboard. I know we also have Naomi on this call, and she was instrumental in identifying kind of a new process for us as our data and research person. But as you can imagine, and this isn't unique to Bellevue, every dashboard that you're looking at is right now suffering from inaccuracies because people are taking at-home tests or not reporting them. So, you know, it's becoming it's not that we can't to the same level identify the individuals when you have, 1,800 cases per day when you've got 200. It's a drastically different situation. So catching up with that, the state is able to access their results through a state database, right? So every time a person takes a test that goes into the health reports, all of that happens. But we don't have access to that, so we actually have to manually enter every report that comes through. And so it became a challenge, especially that first week back with an influx of the test results and how many we were getting all at once.
When you say to everything that comes through, you mean everything that we submit as a test when we get the result back?
Everything that we do ourselves, as well as a parent contacting the school or an attendance person to say, hey, my child's out because they tested positive for COVID, or we had a COVID exposure, or, we're in quarantine, those kinds of things, all coming in a large mass at one time. But blessings to Naomi and her team who have worked tirelessly over the last week to remedy getting all of the things that had happened since January 4th that we're aware of onto that dashboard, and then implementing a new reporting system that's much more streamlined. Nothing has to go through every direct contact tracer, but rather if I'm an attendance person and I know that I have received a report, I can enter that by student ID number. And that way, if I enter it and the principal enters it, it only tracks once onto the dashboard because we're able to really get rid of the duplicates. So it's tracking by student ID number. So helping us to ensure we're not over-representing our data that's on there. But I would say it probably, to be completely honest, I think our dashboard, as all dashboards right now, are underrepresenting the number of COVID positive cases that we're seeing in the community.
I think I see a question from Director Shuey.
Thank you. I want to contextualize this by saying that we have staff that is set up to do a certain level of work, and I appreciate that the amount of these are all extra responsibilities. And so my questions are in the context of fully acknowledging that you guys have twice the regular amount of work. I have a small question that I have some comments later, but my initial question is I've heard from community members that and I don't know if this is lore or accurate, and that's one of the reasons I want to ask is that, well, we took a home test, we're positive, and when we asked what we're supposed to do with that, if we're supposed to report it, we're just told that, we've got too much going on. And so what is the official school policy or district policy on if somebody is positive reporting it? So we sort of know what somebody's positive overall numbers are, and it may be that we don't have the bandwidth to do that, but want to know the answer to that, since otherwise you've got people churning over things that may or may not be accurate.
So Director Shuey, I think we heard most of your question, but just a little bit of it was garbled. But what I heard you say was essentially, what are we expecting, what should we be communicating to families if they do an at-home test and it's positive? Because it sounds like what you've heard and you're not sure is true is that the answer back from some schools might be, don't worry about it, or perhaps we don't need to hear it. But we need to know, what does the district want to do when a family gets an antigen test back, particularly if it's positive? Is that your question?
That is it, and I guess that if somebody calls in, a corollary to that is somebody calls in and tells attendants that they have COVID, does attendants get that number back to anywhere? Or is it just, okay, excused absence?
Yeah, let me chat about what that is. And I think there could be two parts to this answer, but I'm going to answer the first part, which is right now where we're at. So we do want folks to report if they've been in school. We are doing prioritized contact tracing for that. So if a child tests positive on Sunday, even if if they test at home or if they test with us, we've been doing testing on the Sundays, then we're going back to, okay, where was this kid on Friday? Who were they close contacts with? And do we need to do tests to stay with those individuals? So we do want families to report to that. And
where should they report?
They can send that. I mean, honestly, they can send that right now into their nurse, into the attendance person, like whoever their school, elementary school. Oftentimes they report right to the teacher. For us, it doesn't matter so much how we get the information. We're processing that. It's going through the right channels at every school, to my knowledge.
Okay, so that's the second part of the question, is that, so you're answering the question about if it goes to the attendants or to the teacher, there is a protocol for it getting back, and so those are being
correct. They all go through they would all go through the school administrators. They're the one who are managing their COVID response, right, particularly right now. Part of that reason is, as you just heard, we don't have a full-time nurse in every building, so they can't be the main point of contact for all of the COVID pieces. But every morning we're getting a report from the school. The principals are then reporting to the school EDs how many people that they've had report that they have COVID. Who do we need? How many rapid tests do they need for test to stay? So all of that is going through right now through our administrators, but that is a change in practice during the surge. It primarily went through school nurses previous to the surge, where you were not getting necessarily multiple cases reported per day.
Okay, and did it change as far as reporting back, or it's always been reported back, whether it went through, I'm imagining that since it went through the nurses, that's, more finite, but now.
The dashboard we have right now is
both before and
I'm sorry, you're cutting out. I to talk over you, so I thought you were finished. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, so the dashboard right now is reporting everything that's been reported to us back to January 4th. The previous dashboard, though, did report all of those cases that happened before January 4th as well. So we still have access to all of that information, so it's still there. And so we do have all of those pieces. I think the piece that might, and maybe this isn't part of it, but one of the things I'm thinking of that could have been confusing is we're about contact tracing cases in our schools during the infectious period, right? So we're looking at 2 days back from a positive test. So it could be that someone says, hey, I kept my kid home for a couple days because I tested positive. Now they've tested positive, but they weren't at school during their infectious period. Then we're not going to contact trace, that's going to become a lower priority for us in terms of documenting that. So that could be a case. It could also be the case, especially coming right off break. People may have reported to us that they had COVID during break, but we wouldn't have recorded that on the dashboard.
So
how long back is that look back? It's 2 days. So if they were in school 2 days before?
Yeah, it's the 2 days before, correct.
Okay, so if they were in school 3 days before and they test positive on day 3, you're saying that would not be considered something you would include in the dashboard either?
I don't.
All positive cases are going in the dashboard.
So, but I think maybe the delay is so. So basically, if the student tests positive on a Wednesday and they had been in school Tuesday and Monday, we would contact trace essentially where they'd been Wednesday and then Tuesday and Monday, right? If they were in school. But let's say we often have a parent at home, maybe who tests positive. This actually happened to me today. We had 2 kids who had been home 10 days because the parent had tested positive and they wanted to quarantine their children at home with them for 10 days. So they did that. They returned on Tuesday, but they both tested positive on a rapid test today because they were in there. So we're still going to contact trace the 2-day Wednesday, like the part of the day today, as well as Wednesday and Tuesday, and they'll appear on the dashboard. But let's say they had tested positive while they were in those 10 days that they were home. If they hadn't been in school, they're unlikely to show up on our dashboard with regularity because we would not have done any contact tracing with that.
So is it only the ones, 2 quick questions, hopefully, are the only ones that show up on the dashboards the ones you contract trace for? Is that what am I understanding that correctly?
So it's complicated because we're trying to be as transparent as possible about telling people that there's cases. I can assure you the ones that get contact traced are on the dashboard. The other ones I'm saying there's less fidelity.
It's more complicated. Okay. And then my second question is, I guess, a more general one that when people have these questions, I'm hearing a lot of people saying that they don't know where to go, or they ask a question and there's a huge delay. Can I come back if I, these questions about, so is it a bandwidth issue? Is it that they're going to the wrong person? How do they get in touch with people to ask those questions, whether it is about their specific home situation or whether it's a general trying to understand the data better so that they know what to do?
I think it's some of each. There's definitely bandwidth considerations. I can tell you right now, I'm sitting on a lot of emails that I'm sure people wish they had responses to. So in full disclosure, but they should be contacting their school nurse for information about isolation or quarantine. And that's where they should, again, they're also very busy, but they are prioritizing all things related to COVID and COVID response, testing response, isolation, and quarantine, and are more likely to get a more rapid answer through their school nurses than they would be someone at a higher level, further removed from the school.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you.
I'm just going to add for a second that a number of these people have worked Saturday and Sunday and running their clinics, and so they're running 7 days a week and long days and early days. So I'm going to invite as much as possible. If questions can come to me, I'll get answers back to them, but I'd really...
No, and I understand. I think that the question Director Shuey is asking is one of ensuring that people who want to do the right thing know exactly who to go to. So I think that it's helpful to know that our answer is go to your school nurse. You might start with your school secretary or admin to get in touch with that person. But if people are not sure what to do, we do want to make sure, I think, they go to the right person. And I think that's a fair and good thing to be able to communicate. So thank you very much for that. And for the transparency also about everything that's going on. I think I agree, it's very impressive, and I'm grateful. So I think with that, unless there's, okay, I see a hand up, sure.
Just one more question about the absences. And I know a couple of weeks ago, Art had said that, if kids had to stay home, they felt like their parents had to hold them out for a couple of days, that would be excused. But I think, that could evolve over time. And I saw some information out in one of the parent groups saying that, the state actually sets the rules on how the district has to count the absences. So I was wondering if Art could just clarify that for the parents who, want to keep a kid home.
And I do want to just say, after that clarification, we have a question by Director Aris, and then we really are 1 hour over our adjournment time. So then I would ask that we hear Dr. Jarvis, and then we take Director Aris's question or comment, please.
What you're starting to hear about is the 20 days. The state and the funding system says if a student is absent 20 days, they should be dropped from the rolls and not counted for funding anymore. So that's starting to hit with some kids that have just disappeared, that they're really not, they're not known what's happened to them other than they're gone, and My guess is that parents have elected to keep them home, or the kids may have. But we've been excusing the absences. We're going to try to do that as long as we can, as long as we know that the parents are making the choice that the student should stay home for a while. But we are starting to bump into the 20 days of where there's no explanation, and for all practical purposes, the kids have just disappeared. Then we can't excuse that, and we're going to have to drop them from the rolls. But we've kind of arbitrarily said that through really through this week, we're counting them as fully excused and having opted to stay home. But then we're going to have to start the 20-day count.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask Director Ayres to finish for us.
Thank you. Well, thank you for answering that question, because that was one of my questions as well. The second question I had is that I know that we're an opt-in testing district. Have we reconsider going into opt-out version, and if it's a staff shortage or needs extra support to solicit community volunteers?
I'm going to bring my general counsel right to my shoulder. I'm teasing, but there at least one neighboring district chose to go to opt-out instead of opt-in. I do not know of other districts that have, because in essence, what I'm saying to you is I'm going to test your child whether you gave permission or not, unless you opted out. Nothing in the law currently gives us that right to do it, and we have a huge liability. So we've not chosen to opt out. And Shannon, do you want to add
all
anything?
of that? And I know that a few school districts who've considered pursuing that option have had pretty significant issues with respect of parent identification of civil rights violations. So I think that there's a reason why we're in that other group.
I understand the efficacy of that. There's a part of me that would love to go there, but I would not recommend to the Bellevue School District that we take that liability.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the directors. Thank you also to a superintendent and all of the staff who stayed exactly almost 1 hour past when we were supposed to adjourn. So I just thank you for that indulgence. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Thank you.